just before we begin our latest episode, we've just heard the sad news about the passing of Eric Overmyer. Eric was a producer on Homicide from 1997 to 1999. He produced 45 episodes, and he went on to work on The Wire, Treme, Law & Order, Broadwalk Empire, The Man in the High Castle, Bosch, and Bosch Legacy. Eric was very much a beloved colleague, mentor, and creator in his own right, and he will be missed. So we just want to take a moment to extend our condolences to his family, friends, and colleagues. Right, we shall now move into our episode, which is an interview with director John McNaughton. Welcome to Homicide Life on the Set, a podcast about the Emmy Award-winning television show Homicide Life on the Street, with myself, Chris Carr, and Susan Ingram. On today's podcast, we're joined by director John McNaughton. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Homicide Life on the Set. Susan, how are you?
Hello. Great. It's so exciting that we're about finishing up our second season.
Yeah, it's the end of season 2. This is our season finale. There are no cliffhangers, but well, at least I don't think there are. But this is our
We should
final
make one
episode.
up. Let's make up a cliffhanger.
Yeah, we could just cut the interview off halfway through. No, we won't do that. That'd be bad. But yes. So we have got a brilliant guest today. We've got John McNaughton, who directed 5 episodes of the show, didn't he?
Yep. John McNaughton did 5 episodes from 1994 to 96. Should we mention the episode names?
Yeah. Well, one of them's one of my favorites.
Yeah. So the 5 episodes are A Many Splendored Thing, season 2. Season 3, A Model Citizen. Also season 3, Partners. Also season 3, Law and Disorder, which was a crossover episode with Law and Order.
That's it.
And then season 4, Stakeout, which is both Chris and I's one of our favorite episodes that was shot during the 2 feet of snow in the 1996 blizzard.
Yeah.
Which was interesting.
Yeah, lots of great snow action.
Yeah, it came up in the talk with the production office women about what the most one of the most challenging episodes was. And then John talks about it at length today on his interview.
Yeah, he does. And no, fantastic episode. And also he directed Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, which is a very famous and dark film. If you've not seen it, it's definitely worth watching, but just proceed with caution. If you're easily triggered by on-screen sort of violence or suggested violence, then you might want to read the description before going through. But amazing film. And he also went on to direct Lansky, which was an HBO movie with Richard Dreyfuss. He famously directed a film called Wild Things.
That's a fun one, Wild Things.
That is a fun one, yeah, with Kevin Bacon, Nev Campbell, and Matt Dillon, and it was very much a very famous film in the late 90s. I remember that coming out. So yeah, he's done some amazing stuff there.
And the thing I loved about the whole idea of Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, which was the first film when he wrote, directed, and produced it, was the idea of breaking the rules and pushing the boundaries, which is also what Homicide did, which I love that sort of dovetailing. And his origin story, people keep listening. His origin story is so interesting.
It is.
His trail of how he got into the film business and all the interesting jobs and people he met and crazy things that happened to him. It's no wonder he's a storyteller, because it's a great story. And then we do eventually get to Homicide, but his whole journey into the film business and then to Homicide is just really entertaining. So please, it's a great episode.
Yes, it is indeed. Now, before we kick off with the episode, there's a few announcements. Obviously, this is our last episode of season 2. We will be back in May. On May the 21st is when we will return. And we have a very special guest for that episode. Who do we have, Susan?
Yes, so we're going to kick off our 3rd season with John Seda, who was one of the main actors in the show, who came in, was it season 4 or season 5? I should have that in front of me.
Season 5.
Season 5, who's gone on to do absolutely amazing acting. If you've never seen The Pacific, please go watch it. But also, look his resume up. He has just gone on to do amazing things. So we're going to kick off season 3 with John Seda, and we want to give him a little plug today. He's doing, I think he said, Chris, was this his first theater?
I believe so. I'd have to re-listen to the video to confirm. But yeah, he's doing some theater.
Yeah, so we're going to plug. He's doing some theater in New York at the Blvd Theater at Lehman College. And the piece is called Freestyle, A Love Story. Friday, March 27th, 2026, from 7 to 8:30 p.m. at the Blvd Theater at Lehman College. Yeah. And it stars John Seda and Luna Lauren Velez. And it's about 2 former lovers who reconnect unexpectedly at a freestyle music concert where the rhythms of the past and present collide, unraveling their journey from a fiery 1987 romance to the lives they've built and lost over the decades. So we wanted to give him a shout out because that's a new path for John, doing some theater. And then we'll have him on in May with an absolutely terrific episode. It was really fun talking to him, and kudos to him for responding right away when we tried to contact him, and for coming on the show when he's incredibly busy. He is a busy actor.
He is. And it was a brilliant, really great conversation, really good fun.
Great interview.
So if you're in New York, please go and support John.
So definitely check John out if you're in New York, and definitely check him out on our kickoff for our 3rd season in May.
Yeah.
We also wanted to thank again, we've just had some lovely contributions to our Buy Me a Coffee page, which is buymeacoffee.com/homicide POQ.
Right? POQ.
We're not even going to explain that anymore.
Yeah, Homicide POQ is.
But if you go to the landing page on buymeacoffee.com and search in their little search window for Homicide Life on the Set, you can find us. And we wanted to thank Nathan, who gave us our most recent contribution, and also everyone else: Todd, Jay, Becky, Debbie, 2 anonymous folks, and our initial contributor, Tracy. I wanted to thank everybody for buying us so much coffee. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Now, apparently, there is a Latin meaning behind POQ, which we didn't realize when this happened. So maybe there was some sort of spiritual intervention. I don't know. But the Latin is Pembleton Omnia Currit, which is Latin for Pembleton gets to the bottom of everything, is what it actually translates to.
Exactly.
So that was a bit of an eye-opener. I quite enjoyed that. So thank you.
There you go.
So, so thank you, Jay, for that. So, and thank you, everybody, for all your contributions and your lovely messages.
Yeah.
And it's just touching to hear how Homicide, the TV show, means something, and how this podcast also means something to everybody as well. So thank you. I'm glad we could do that. So. And
also the Facebook group, Waterfront Homicide Life on the Street Facebook group, really has a lot of interesting discussions going on, and we want to give a shout out to them too, because they're keeping the torch lit too. So thank you all over there. So we did also want to remind everyone that although we talk a lot about the remastered version of Homicide that's on Peacock, it is also available on Tubi and Charge, and on others. Those are free, and then it's on other paid services like Fandango, Apple, YouTube, and Amazon. So it's out there on many platforms now, and I hope people are finding it and watching it, and then hopefully finding us so that they can hear the behind-the-scenes stories and hear from the directors and the writers and the creators and the crew and actors. One more thing before we start. John McNaughton reminded us in this interview that it is the 40th anniversary of Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. So that's also sort of interesting timing in having talked to him recently.
Yeah, and there's I think there's a new re-release of it coming out, so it's been digitally remastered as well. So we will look forward to finding out more about that. But so this is John McNaughton. I hope you enjoy it. Take care. John, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Hey, John. So I just listened to most of an interview, a video interview with you from 2019 about Henry. And you have a really fascinating, and also from the bio you sent, you have a really fascinating background on how you actually made your way into film. And then obviously from the get-go, producing, writing, directing, your first film, doing all those things. So do you want to sort of take us back and how you got into film? And then from there, if it's not too long of a question, what the connection was to get you to Homicide, Life on the Street.
Okay. Stop me if this gets too long and meandering, because it's a long story.
It's a great story, though. Go. Yay.
As I've often told people in interviews, and I didn't go to film school. I went to art school. My first love was fine arts, painting, sculpting, and of course, rock and roll music, which I played as a young man. But so I didn't, to me, film students were a certain breed, and I wasn't one of them. I was an art student, which was crazy people, that were out till the sun rose, and like our artists have always done over the course of history. And those are the people I ran with, and that was the fun that I had. And I went away to the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana and was an art major. And I lasted 2 years and kind of crossed paths with one of my instructors who I didn't think, one of my teachers who I didn't think very highly of. And it wasn't a great art school, but I certainly met a bunch of great people. And one night at a party, I had an epiphany, shall we say. This was the 60s, so we often had epiphanies in those days. And it was that, I was at a dead end in my art school career, and that what was the art form of my life that had influenced me actually more than even fine art. And I was an only child, and I grew up sitting in front of the television, and I knew every television show, every actor, but it wasn't. I liked movies, I loved movies, but I wasn't like like the film student. I saw 12 Godards last week, and blah blah blah. It was, no, where's the party? Where could we stay out all night long? Where could we get in trouble? And that was, the art student sort of mindset. So it was time to go. It was time to leave the University of Illinois. And although I'd made some great friends, and numerous of whom are friends to this day, it was time to go. And there was a school in Chicago called Columbia College, not Columbia University in New York, that was a media school. And I don't know how I got information on it, but they were one of the few schools that offered courses in a major in television production as opposed to film production. So I transferred. I went back to the south side of Chicago, which was where I was from, and I had my screwball friends there, believe me, and enrolled in Columbia College. And Columbia College was really great. It was really hands-on, and almost all the teachers were working professionals. So they weren't theoretical, they were practical. And they had great facilities, and very fortunately for me, it wasn't my choice, but you had to take still photography. It was just a requisite. So I took still photography, and my father, through a friend of his who was a Chicago police officer, a photographer for the Chicago Police Department, sold him an old used Rolleiflex for $35. And that was my first camera. And it was a great camera. And so I loved Chicago streets, which is where I grew up. We just, as kids, we were on the streets, not necessarily doing positive things, but having fun, that's for sure. And so hand me a camera, and I know the city, I know the neighborhood, and there's so much to see. And there's so many, and stories. We were always doing stuff that made for great stories. And, I've come to realize over the long period of time is that, what I'm best at and what gives me the most is telling stories with pictures. So Columbia College led me into still photography, and television production in those days was not like, episodes of series. In Chicago, it was the news. It was, on the floor with 3 big old cameras, etc. And that's not what I was going to do with my life. So I really wound up concentrating on still photography on the streets of Chicago. So I graduated from Columbia College, I believe, in 1972. And there were no jobs. I used to go on, I'd look at the want ads in the Chicago newspapers on the weekend and it'd say, oh, production assistant wanted at a, TV station. And I'd see my entire graduating class there. And then when you actually got in for the interview, oh, well, that job has been filled, but would you be interested in phone sales? And it's like, no, I'm not interested in phone sales because, there were no jobs. And in those days, there weren't that many jobs to start out with in Chicago. So I wound up, I got married and I needed to have a job, and I wound up taking a job in an International Harvester factory on the south side of Chicago, which is where I grew up, where my grandfather had worked, my father had worked previously, my mother and her sisters had worked during World War II when women went to work in the factories, and my uncle Archie, my father's brother, worked out his career there, and he was working there, and he got me a job. So I had a factory job. It's not very inspiring, to say the least, but it paid well. It was a union job and good benefits and et cetera, and it wound up being the longest continuous employment I've ever held, which was 19 months. And eventually I got an offer through my wife at the time, who was working in a fancy advertising agency in Chicago. They had an opening in their audiovisual department, and I went in and I got the job. And I worked 10 months in an advertising agency in Chicago, working for a man named Jack Mirabelli, who was he was a great person. The rest of the people in the advertising agency, nah, but Jack was great. He had been he joined the military as a young man and was a photography enthusiast. So he got into that end of the U.S. Army and became a cinematographer and a still photographer, and was all over the world and learned his craft and taught me more in the 10 months I worked there than I learned at any school.
Those guys, the photographers in the Army and the Navy, I met some of them when I was in training in L.A., and those guys were amazing. So what a great person for you to run into that early in your career.
A great guy, and he knew everything. It was interesting because they used to, in the advertising agency, before they'd go out and hire a production company to shoot their commercials, they'd have their storyboards and their script, and they would bring it to my boss, Jack, and they would have him do a mock-up. Now, at least on 2 separate occasions, the mock-up was better than what they pay, they were just paying him a salary. Then they would pay a large sum of money to a production company to come in from LA or New York and and what Jack had done was better. So I learned so much from Jack, but I hated the advertising business. I just hated it. My marriage was going bad, and my whole life just spun out of control. And I split up with my wife. I quit my job in the advertising agency, and I was sort of, I was nowhere. I was at the bottom ebb of my life, the bottom point, and actually wound up one evening when I was staying at an old friend's house, and he was having an affair with a married woman. She was coming over at midnight, and he didn't want me there because would be embarrassed. So I was turned out on the street. I didn't know where to go. I went to the last bar till it closed, and then I wound up sleeping in the bushes of a place called the Greenstone Church, a very famous old church in the south side neighborhood of Pullman in Chicago. At that place, I sort of knew that I had to, I had to do something with my life other than, it wasn't going anywhere positive. And fortunately, an old friend from high school who was living in the woods in Missouri was driving through town and visiting a friend, and I was at the friend's house, and the guy that was coming through was a guy named Dave Crussell, and he said, John, I'm going up to Davenport, Iowa to join the carnival, the world's biggest carnival, Royal American Shows. I met these people in Missouri, and this is how they make their living, and I'm leaving tomorrow morning. You want to come with me? I went, I'm there. So I had a little duffel bag, and I had a camera. and a couple of pairs of jeans, 5 pairs of socks, 5 pairs of underwear, and a few T-shirts and a jacket. And I jumped in Dave Studebaker the next morning, his old green station wagon, and we drove to Davenport, Iowa. And we got to at night, and it was like magical because there was a big old baseball stadium, minor league stadium, and all the carnies were out and on the river, on the Mississippi River, and the carny lot was the Iowa State Fair. So, we parked and we went, we parked because we were living in the station wagon. We would be living in the station wagon. So we parked and we went wandering down. There were picnic tables with all these carny folk, and Dave knew some of them. They're drinking beer and having a good time. And I go, this is cool. And the next day, Dave took me to see the boss, Frank Russell, who was this great big guy who was smoking a Pall Mall cigarette. And he goes, and I was nervous because to me, I was never good at job interviews. And Dave walked up and goes, hey, and he says, hey, Dave, how you doing? And he goes, hey, Frank. He goes, this is my friend John. You got a job for him? And he just looks at me, blows some smoke off his Pall Mall and goes, yep. And that was it. I was loading a truck like 1 minute later. Yeah. And I was a carny. And I went from Davenport, Iowa, which was the first stop, all the way up through into Canada, 4 big, huge provincial fairs in Canada, and then back to Milwaukee, and then back town for town, all the way down to Shreveport, Louisiana, which was a whole carny year. And everything that could possibly happen that you could imagine happened with some of the craziest, most fun people I've ever known. And one of the great times of my life. And I photographed it, and I'm putting a lot of it together right now. So anyway, after the carnival, I went with a couple of carny friends who lived in Dallas, Fort Worth, and spent a couple weeks there. And then I always loved New Orleans. I'd spent time there, and I bought a 1950 Plymouth Business Coupe, which is a really cool car in Dallas. It was for sale across the street from where I was staying for $500. I drove it to New Orleans, where my best friend was a deep sea oil diver who was originally from Champaign, Illinois. And he was working all over the world in these off the oil rigs, diving in the oil fields, laying the pipeline.
That's a dangerous job, and those guys make a lot of money. I knew a guy who did that. That is a tricky job. Yeah.
And we're friends to this day. He's living in Mexico now, and he's a musician, which was his first love. But anyway, so I wound up staying at his place, and I was, I had photographed the carnival. I had friends that I'd gone to school with in New York in publishing, and I was going to go to New York and try and get my photographs published. And I happened to pick up the newspaper at 3 a.m, and I'm looking at the job listings, and it said silversmith's apprentice, and an address on Bourbon Street and a number. I go, I was always good at working with small things, making model planes and trains and cars and stuff when I was a kid. And I go, I could do that. So next day I borrowed a suit from my friend Jim, who I was staying with, put on a suit and tie, and which he bought in England because he was working in the North Sea, in the oil, the oil business. And it was a cool suit, I have to say. And I took the trolley down to the French Quarter, walked down to the address, Victor Duncan III, Silver, and applied for the job and got it. So now I'm working on Bourbon Street making silver jewelry with some of the craziest people I've ever met. And it was nothing but a cool time.
And all these jobs, what great background to make films later and to write later. I mean, just great stuff.
I've written a script about the carnival. I got 2 carnival scripts. One is from a book called Carney Kill, which is like a B noir novel, which is, one type. Then the guy that I wrote Henry with insisted that we write my story of the carnival. So we wrote that too many years ago. So anyway, then the place I was working at, the silversmith shop, which was so much fun and such cool people, went belly up, because it was too wild a place. And so there was this famous restaurant across the street, the Court of Two Sisters, which exists to this day. And these Italian guys from New York came and bought it. while we were working there? Well, these guys were connected to some other people in New York, shall we say, and we never got along with them particularly well, but there was a beautiful young woman named Marie who I was interested in, and one of the guys across the street was interested in, and we were bad blood between he and I. And so anyway, they also owned the building that the silversmiths, they were buying real estate in New Orleans. They often owned the building where the shop was that I worked in, and they were seizing everything. So a guy I worked with named Kurt and I rented a truck, and we just grabbed everything from the silversmith shop. All the cutting wheels, the polishing wheels, all the tools, the benches, everything that wasn't nailed, and we're loading it in this U-Haul truck. And here comes a police car, and out of the backseat of the police car gets my nemesis from across the street. He'd obviously paid the cops off to come. They said, "Okay, you stay right here," because it wasn't the police jurisdiction; it was a sheriff's jurisdiction. Two different outfits, and we're going to the sheriff's and we're getting a warrant, and we're going to, this, that, and the other thing. So they left us there. And I went next door to this t-shirt shop who were the people we were friendly with and said, "Listen, here's what's going on." They said, "Well, here, call the sheriff, see what they say." And it was like 3:30 in the afternoon. I called the sheriff and got a very nice lady. And she said, "Well, if they're on their way here now, there's no way they're going to get the paperwork they need by the end of this day. So I can't advise you, but that, we closed that truck, jumped in, drove across the Mississippi River to some friends I knew. They were also oil divers, to a town called Belle Chase, and they had this cool house up on stilts back in the back country, and we hid out for 2 weeks, and then drove back to New Orleans, and I set up my own little shop and got a new apartment and had.
I'm seeing a whole TV series going on here.
Well, anyway,
great. What a great bunch of stories.
When that didn't pan out, so I wound up getting a job building sailboats, big racing, beautiful sailboats, with another bunch of crazy people. And I have some great photographs of one of the boats we built. We built this one big racer called Gonna Getcha, which went into the Southern Ocean racing circuit and won second place. It was this beautiful red hot rod sailboat. It was gorgeous. Anyway. So I'm going along, working the sailboat shop, still staying out all night long in the crazy bars and the crazy people. And one night it was like 3 a.m. I was out with my friend Jim, the deep sea oil diver, and a bunch of these French people that came over. They were working in the Louisiana Department of Education as an exchange program. They were all crazy and fun. And we were out all night long. And at 3 a.m, Jim and I had interest in the same, in a woman whose name I won't mention. We're all three of us still friends to this day, but there was bad blood at the time. And Jim and I got in a fist fight at 3 a.m. And I had my favorite t-shirt from the carnival on, and Jim tore it off my body. So I grabbed him by the hands and I had restrained him. And I was sort of in the wrong, and I didn't want to be continuing this. And I just went to myself, "What are you doing with your life, idiot? What are you doing?" And that's it. So a couple of days later, I packed up the truck, rented another U-Haul truck, packed up all these silversmiths gear, all this other stuff. And I was driving a 1957 Jaguar XK140 at this time, which I have a photograph of if you're interested. And I had blown the motor up, so it was useless, but it was beautiful. And I chained it to the U-Haul truck and drove home to Chicago. But before I left, I called my cousin who owned a bar in the south suburbs of Chicago. I said, "Brock, I'm coming back to Chicago. I need a job." He said, "Okay, when you home?" I said, "I'm home on Tuesday." He says, "Come in Wednesday." So I drove to my parents' house, and when I got to their house, I had a $10 bill and some coins in my pocket. That was it. And went to work at my cousin's bar. And over that bar, a while later, this guy that used to come in every day and get drunk in the afternoon was some kind of salesman. Just said, "Oh, yeah, you're that guy, you're the guy everyone says wants to be in the movie business, wants to be a movie director. Are you that? Yeah, aren't you?" I go, "Yeah, that's me." And he said, well, I'm working with these guys. He throws this business card on the bar, and it's a company called Maljack Productions Incorporated. I called him, and those are the people that would wind up funding Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. And I just got an email a couple days ago from a publicist in New York. They're getting ready to do the 40th anniversary re-release of Henry.
Oh, wow. Right.
So that's how I
Crazy.
became a movie director. And there's a lot of other chapters in there. I can't, it'll take the rest of the year to finish.
Yeah, so you made some films. You made some sort of compilation crime films
Yeah.
that Broderick Crawford narrated.
Dealers in Death.
Dealers in Death, yeah. And you were making, I understand, another deal for another sort of compilation film like that when the deal fell through, and your partner said, "Screw it, let's take that money, the money we have, and make a film."
Yeah.
And so could you talk about how that happened, and then all these things really dovetail with the kinds of tone and the kinds of stories that were told on Homicide: Life on the Street. So talk about how you got your first film, and then the idea that so many of these themes. I know in the in the interview I listened to this morning, you talked about when you were making Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, there were these questions. Oh, it should be resolved. Oh, people should get arrested, blah, blah, blah. But what you pushed for was breaking the rules and pushing the boundaries.
That was my art school background.
Yeah, exactly, which is exactly what Homicide did too. It broke the rules and it pushed the boundaries. So give us that sort of arc of how you started with your first major film, and then noticed by how you got how you got to Homicide from there.
Okay, well, I'm going to back up a little bit because
Sure.
while I was living at my cousin's house and working in his bar, and I went to meet Waleed Ali with that card that came over the bar, and we were a good year or more away from making Henry, but I wound up doing some other things with them. But I left the bar job, and to stay alive, I got a construction job, because I had worked as a carpenter before, so I got a union construction job, and I was working remodeling Burger Kings for this company. And we would work nights, and they were good people to work for. It was a fun bunch, crazy bunch as always, and it paid well. And then we would remodel a Burger King, and then I'd have a few weeks off, and I could hustle in the film, But because I was sort of feeling I'd hit a dead end, and I was living out in the south suburbs of Chicago, and there was a school out past the south suburb in the cornfields called Governor's State University. And I enrolled in graduate school and in film. And there was this great teacher who was a documentary filmmaker of much renown, and his name was Marian Marzinski. And his assistant was Jean de Ziganzak. And he had brought John from Rhode Island School of Design.
No way. Wow. Wow. That's cool.
And that's where I met Jean. Well, Mars died a couple years ago, but he mentored Jean. And Jean wound up, and he recognized Jean's talent and brought him to Governor State University. And I met Jean, and we hit it off. And I wound up shooting this documentary. The footage, I never really cut it, but of my mother and her sisters. And my mother was one of 5 sisters, Polish-American girls, that were all beautiful and were close their entire lives and were just inspirational in my life. They were such cool people. My mother was one of the finest human beings that ever walked, and her sisters were all fabulous. So Jean and I shot this dinner that we threw for them, and we did a bunch of still photography, but Jean shot this, and that was the first project he and I did together. And we have worked together not only in Homicide, but he shot a feature film for me. He shot at least 2 TV pilots for me.
Wasn't he in the running for Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer as well?
And he was supposed to shoot Henry, but he had a pre-commitment to a documentary. And unlike usually they're always pushing you back. well, they pushed this forward 2 weeks and 2 weeks into our schedule, and we couldn't use them. So, unfortunately, but yes, he was going to shoot Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer.
And I remember when we interviewed him, he said he thought that your choice of cinematographer for that was better, would worked better than if Jean had held it, that had shot it handheld. That the way you shot it with the very still camera and the sort of meditative, lock off the shot and let the action happen in the shot, as opposed to a moving camera.
Yeah.
And that the importance of what was happening in the story didn't need to be heightened with a camera. That what was happening in the story was so intense that the camera guy that you chose, and who was that? Who was the cameraman?
Charlie Lieberman.
Yes, Charlie Lieberman. That technique was the correct technique for that for Henry.
I agree, and as my dear mother used to say, everything happens for a reason. So I was like beside myself when we lost John, because I was used to working with him, and we got along well, unlike Charlie and myself, and but I didn't know that yet. Anyway, so yeah, but I do think what Charlie, I mean, he did a fabulous job on the film. And where was I? I saw it. Oh, it was just shown here at Halloween, and I hadn't seen it for a while. And it was the digital projection, which I forgot how good it looked. It was like, man, it looks good for having absolutely no money. So anyway, so I met Jean way back then, and but anyway, so I became hooked up with Waleed and his brother Malik, the Ali brothers, who were Maljack Productions, and the company that's still in existence as MPI, but that stands for Maljack Productions Incorporated. And Waleed, unfortunately, has been deceased for some years, but Waleed and I became pretty close. And I was working for them doing something I'm not even going to go into because it'll make things too long. And I left. That's when I went into doing construction to make a lot more money, and wound up buying. That's when I bought my first video gear. So I left the employ of MPI. But before I left, Waleed said, "Remember, John, someday you and I," because Waleed was a dreamer and a visionary, and he said, "One day, John, you and I are going to make a movie." I go, "Cool, let's go." Call me when you got the money, and quite a year or so later, you've seen Henry, you've seen the guy get the TV over the head, the very large guy. That was Ray Atherton, who was a very unusual person.
That's a great scene.
He was a video pirate, as it turned out. He was many things, and he had been charged with, I believe, 42 felony counts in Los Angeles in the first video piracy trial. His co-defendants were Roddy McDowell and I think Rock Hudson, perhaps, because they were film collectors. He was a film. He was a film thief. Basically.
So you typecast him into that spot, huh?
Exactly. So anyway, but Ray had a lot to do with Ray was an expert in public domain. He knew everything that was in the public domain, and so he went to work for after Ray was acquitted of 42 of the 44 felony counts, and he came back. He was in LA. He came back to Chicago, and he needed a job. He went to work for the Ali brothers, and this was the very first week of VHS video cassettes. And it turned out that Ray could identify, some pretty interesting productions from the past that were in the public domain. So all you had to do is get a print, and you could duplicate it and sell it on VHS. And Ray was a film collector and knew who had the best prints all over the nation. And some of those film collectors in those days, before there was much value to it, were some of the most crazy, skeevy, living in their mother's basements with piles of film canisters and smoking cigarettes. So Ray was, spotting for the Ali brothers, and he found out, and they were starting to make money in the video cassette business. And it also turned out that one of the great sellers in those days was low-budget horror films that people hadn't, they played drive-ins, they played minimal releases. So they were kind of fresh, and they were cheap to buy the rights. And so they were great moneymakers for the Ali brothers, and they were doing that. And but as that market developed, the price for the rights kept escalating. The people wanted more and more money, and I had made a deal with Blvd to make that Dealers in Death show, but Ray Atherton provided us with all the film footage, old the public domain films of gangsters from the old days and all that, and we used all that stuff, and it did okay. We all did okay on that, and we were going to do another one. Somebody had found a cache of old professional wrestling footage, black and white footage, when it was really the Wild West, not like what we have today, very corporate, etc. And this guy that had the footage, was going to sell us the footage, and we were going to do a documentary. So it was all set to go, and I was living in the city by then, but Blvd was out in the south suburban region. So I got my old junk car and drove out to see Blvd and sat there, and, it's going to be my next job. Great. And Blvd said, "You know what, John, these guys that own the footage, they quoted us a price, and then they found out we really could afford to pay it. They went, oh, well, we didn't say 20,000. We said 40,000, whatever. They upped the price by double. And you just didn't deal with the Ali brothers in that manner. It's like, you set a price, that's what we'll pay." And so he just said, "No, we're done. We're not doing this. Get out of here." So I go in there thinking this is my job. And Waleed told me, "You know what, John, we're not making that wrestling documentary. These guys tried to rip us off, and I told them to get lost." And I'm like, "Waleed, what about, I need a job." And he says, "But I'll tell you what." He goes, "Remember all that long time ago, and we were talking, and I said, one day, John, one day we'll make a movie together?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, I'm going to make you an offer. I want you to make me a horror film. You can choose the subject matter. I'll give you $100,000. You want to make that deal?" And if he would have said, "I'll give you $50, I would have said yes. It was $100,000. Yeah, Waleed, yeah, okay. So we shook hands, and I freaked out. This is my lucky day. This is it. So I was walking. I had no idea what the subject would be. I was not a crazy horror film fan. I was more into European art cinema and classic films. And so I'm walking down the hallway to the front door of the building, and I took a turn into an office that was occupied by someone I'd grown up with, and he got the job working for the Ali brothers through me. His name was Gus. And we grew up together, played in a rock and roll band together when we were kids. We did everything together as kids. He was a collector and an aficionado of the strange, the weird, and the arcane. And he had this big console set up with a few video decks, VHS decks, and just stacks and stacks of video cassettes of weird stuff. And I walked in, and I was kind of in a daze after. Like I say, this is it, kid. This is your day. And I walked in. I said, "Gus, Wally just offered me $100,000 to make a horror film." And he goes, "Well, what are you going to do? I mean, do you know what's it going to be?" I go, "I have no fucking idea. I don't. I'll think of something, but right now, I don't know." And he goes, "Here, look at this." And he took a cassette off the console and popped it in the machine and pressed play. And I don't know what it was. It was ABC, CBS, or NBC, but they had a TV show called 2020, which was a news magazine show where there were news stories, but long form. And he popped it in, and it was like a 20-minute segment on a guy named Henry Lee Lucas, who I'd never heard of. And I'd also never heard the term serial killer. And as I found out some time later, that's because it had only been coined like 10 months previously by the FBI.
Amazing.
So the team from whatever network it was out, tracking down the Henry Lee Lucas story. And I'm sitting there watching it, and I mean, where I grew up, there were a lot of low rent people to be seen, and I was and then the carnival. I mean, I was sort of an aficionado of dangerous characters, shall we say. And I looked at Henry Lee Lucas, and he had one eye that went the wrong way. And then they showed, I don't know, and here was his partner, Otis Elwood Toole. And this guy looked like, if I would have seen him walking down the street, I would have turned around and ran. I mean, these guys just looked like they were going to kill you. So he played the thing, 20 minutes worth, and I just went, there it is. There's our movie. And of course it was. And then I was hooked up with a guy named Steve Jones, who, we work together to this day if we ever work again. He became the producer. And I had been in a whole different life, but Steve had been working in the commercial production business, animation here in Chicago for, those same years. And he was very well connected into the production community of Chicago. And although Chicago was not a major production center for TV shows or for motion pictures, it was a major production center for commercials. In fact, back when I was working in the advertising agency, it was New York, Chicago, and LA was a distant third in commercial production, but that changed. So anyway, Steve had it, and that's how we found the people. But Steve, I needed a writer. And Steve had happened to have been working with the Organic Theater Company. And do you know who Stuart Gordon is? Reanimator, the director of Reanimator. I mean, he's a horror legend. He's gone now, but he had a theater company in Chicago called the Organic Theater. And amongst the other people in that theater were Joey Mantegna, Dennis Farina, and Dennis Franz, and Tom Tolles, who would be Otis in our film. And I mean, they were just a really great, gifted bunch. But they were, as most of the people I've got along well with, they were all nuts, crazy, wild characters. And so anyway, they had just, they operated on a shoestring for so many years, but they had done a play in Chicago called Bleacher Bums, about these characters who used to hang out in the bleachers at Wrigley Field, Cubs Park. And, they were just and they did a play about it, and it became a huge hit play in Chicago. And then it went to LA, and it ran for 13 consecutive years. And Mayor Bradley, I think, declared a Bleacher Bums Day in LA because it was so successful. But anyway, that was the Organic Theater. So they had survived on a shoestring for years and years, but they sold this idea to a network, and it became a TV show. And guess, oh no, it wasn't Bleacher Bums. It was, they did another play, and that play was called ER.
Oh, wow.
and it's not the ER, but
Interesting.
it was, they did one season, and Elliot Gould played the lead, and it didn't succeed, but that's where it came from.
Huh.
They went and spent time in an emergency room, their little ensemble, and and then they improvised the play, and it was a great play. And it was ER that became ER they sold. And they each got like $30,000 because like 8 of them, they used to improvise. And so there would be 8 writing credits. And of course, the first money that any of them ever made in their lives, within 6 months, they were at each other's throats, and the company dissolved and blew up, and they were all at loose ends. And Richard Fire, who was like second in command after Stuart Gordon, who was an actor and a writer, needed a job. So I met Richard, we hit it off, and Richard and I would write Henry. And Richard, whenever I see Henry and stuff, I see he was such an eccentric, such a character, and same thing. And just some of the things that he came up with that were just really cool stuff. He was really gifted. He's gone, but as is Tom Tolles. So Richard and I wrote it, and then we cast it out of Richard's apartment. And Tommy came in because Tommy was working, Richard and Tommy had worked together forever. Tracy came in because she was kind of a new member of a late member of the Organic Theater Company. She'd come from Texas, but we couldn't find a Henry. And we finally found an actor that we both thought was very good, but he was older and he wasn't particularly sexy. And so the romance was going to have to be more, between Henry and Becky would have been different. And then the makeup artist, Jeff Siegel, that had come into our group, kept saying, well, I know this guy. You should probably see this guy, because Jeff Siegel used to direct theater, and he had worked with Michael Rooker in a play. And he said, I know this guy that'd be really right for this role and stuff. And Richard Fire didn't really get along with Jeff Siegel. So Jeff Siegel had an idea. Richard Fire's answer was no. So Richard didn't, and I just said, well, Richard, we're not, what do we got to lose? Let's see this guy. Okay. So made an appointment, and I'm sitting in Richard's apartment and we're working on the script. Doorman from below, because he was living in a high rise up the far north end of the city. The phone rings. It's the door. Well, there's a Michael Rooker here to see you. Okay, send him up. I think Richard was on like the 26th floor and waiting, and there's a knock at the door. So I got up from the table where we worked, and I went and I opened the door, and there was Michael, and he was wearing what he would wear in the movie. Those were his clothes. And I looked at him and my jaw just dropped, and I said a prayer, and I'm not particularly religious, but I said a prayer. Oh God, please let him be able to act, because this is the guy. I mean, there's Henry, as my mother said.
So perfect for that role. And I just saw him recently in Tombstone. I just watched that again, which is one of my favorite films. I love this idea, though, that your background brought you so many different characters, and then you end up with this piece that's completely character driven, because the idea of anyway, it's very character driven, and then you end up on Homicide, which is so character driven. So go ahead. Well, we need to get to that link of how you got to Homicide, which I'm assuming some of which is from Jean. But go ahead, finish up with Henry, because I would encourage our listeners to watch Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. It's not for everyone.
Oh, no. Yeah.
But give it a watch, because it does break the rules and pushes the boundaries about what horror filmmaking is. I love this idea that they were the monsters in your horror film, because you didn't have a budget to have, Godzilla and,
Yes.
and King Kong, or even lots of blood and people's heads exploding or whatever. So
yeah, quick addendum on what Susan's asking and saying. I'm fascinated by the sort of the reality behind Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, because I've read John Douglas's book about the FBI profiling of serial killers, and your film really does get into that insane mindset and logic of a serial killer in a very authentic way that other films never have. And I was just wondering, because I know it's obviously inspired by a real case. I was wondering to what lengths you kind of dived into that with the research for the film and the premise.
Well, you have to remember, this is before the internet, so it wasn't just
go to the library. Right? God.
So we news articles that we could glean, and et cetera, and we're reading about them, and there wasn't that 2020. You saw enough of them, and I wish I don't. It has to be exist somewhere, because that was a major, network TV show, but I don't have a copy of it. But after that, we just went, I don't know. It's what's in Henry's soul is in all of our souls. I think you could find it if you, if you want to have a bad night, looking. And Michael Rooker came from just a really rough background in Jasper, and a town called Jasper, Alabama. And one time when and the other wonderful thing, because Richard Fire, and so many the actors came from theater, Richard Fire, taught me a lot. And we rehearsed for 2 weeks, and we were really able to perfect the script. And Michael came from a poor white Southern background in Jasper, Alabama, a rough time. And his parents split up, and his father moved to Chicago, And he, just through pure determination and good fortune, got a scholarship to DePaul University's. Is it DePaul? It's the Goodman School of Drama. I think it was an adjunct of DePaul University, and became an actor. But he was a kid from poor white trash, basically, and with all these kids, were from well-to-do families and stuff. He was kind of an outcast, but he had a gift, and he's very smart, and he's a great guy. We're friends to this day. And anyway, so in rehearsal, I remember one time asking Michael, well, Michael, how are you finding this character? He goes, oh, I had an uncle who was just like this guy. So,
Wow.
but working in those rehearsals, we just perfected the script so much from what the actors were bringing, what the actors were, as they grew into the characters. What I'm thinking is like, and then, but it's a method I've used since. You work with the actors, but you got the writer there. And the actors have ideas. Once they start to take on the characters, they know those characters better than anyone. But don't just open the barn doors wide and let them say whatever they want to say. Let them say what they're feeling and what they think, how they think it should be reformed, and let the writer do the writing and work. And then their roles become like custom tailored clothing. It's just hand sewn specifically for them. And that's what we did in the rehearsal process. And,
Which is also on Homicide, which is unlike many other things I worked on. The writers were on the set, which was many things I worked on, they would kick the writers off. But on Homicide, they were there. Yeah.
Believe me, I remember them sitting right
behind you. Right?
Yeah, not much fun.
At any rate. So we made Henry, and the people that made it hated it. The people that funded it hated it. They wanted it, like I say, Henry owes, it's a horror film. Oh, it's a horror film. But it owes more to Ingmar Bergman, who was much a bigger influence on me than William Castle. I was, like I say, I'd seen all the Bergman films. I went to horror films as a kid, and I liked them okay, but they weren't my favorite films. I liked drama, and and eventually, like I say, by the time I was in art school, and European art cinema became my, what interested me more than anything. And at that time in life. And so we made Henry. And when I remember when they, the MPI people, they said, but John, this is an art film, what are we going to do with this? It's shit. We can't sell this. So that kind of put a crimp in our relationship. Although, again, they're getting ready to release it at 40th year. I mean, go on Internet Movie Database right now. It's streaming on 6 platforms, and video and theatrically and whatever else, streaming for 40 years.
Yeah, stood the test of time. When I was looking things up about it, the Time reviewer Richard Corliss at the time called you a coroner with a touch of the poet, which is like also, I mean, I'm not forcing all these these connections, like that, forcing all these connections to Homicide, but what a great, that is what Homicide's about too, is like the dead and the poetry of life and the way they had to live with dealing with death every day. So there's so many things that dovetailed with Homicide out of Henry. And did Jean make that connection for you? Did they come to you because the film?
The fact that Jean was the cinematographer is why I agreed to do the show.
Oh, okay. And so did Henry catch their attention? And tell us about how you got there from Henry, because I think there's so many parallels.
Well, Henry, again, there's an artist named Joe Coleman, and if you've ever seen the original Henry poster, there's this painting on it of all. And Joe Coleman painted like Hieronymus. I mean, he's kind of the contemporary Hieronymus Bosch. We're still friends. His career is like skyrocketing right now. And anyway, Henry was made, but it was going nowhere. It was shelved, and they didn't think it had any commercial potential. But it had been Joe Coleman who I met through my friend Steve Hager, who was at that point the editor of High Times magazine in New York, the pot magazine. I'd gone to school with him at Champaign. He was from Champaign. A crazy character, my friend to this day, crazy character today. And anyway, he helped us get a distribution deal with Vestron a little bit later, which then collapsed. But Henry was getting a lot of notoriety because the first major screening was Joe Coleman, the artist, used to put on these little boutique screenings in New York of just weird, strange, horrific, crazy shit. And invite, the cognoscenti. And there was a critic from the Village Voice named Elliot Stein who came to this screening and saw Henry. And, there probably wasn't less than 100 people in the screening. And Elliot Stein goes home and writes an article, full page, Village Voice, best picture of the year, Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. Boom, things started to change.
Wow.
But I got, also at that screening was somebody I was just speaking to on the phone yesterday, who was my first and last agent. His name was Scott Yassilo. And Scott was working for the Gersh agency, but I don't think he was even an agent yet. He was the kid that went for coffee and who was the assistant or whatever. He was just getting started there. And that was his job, to go out and dig up new talent. And, so he went to the screening. He saw Henry, came back. He told the people, the higher ups at the agency, you got to sign this. And I was signed to the Gersh agency. And then Scott did become an agent, a junior kid agent. And Gail Mutrix, she was a producer on Homicide. And Scott knew Gail Mutrix through the New York scene in the world. And the interesting thing, one reason I liked Homicide was they were, at that time, in the first season or two, they were hiring strictly feature directors because they didn't want TV to crank it out TV. They wanted something different, something better. And I don't mean to disparage all the TV that isn't like Homicide, but that's what they were going for. And so they sent me a video of, but the first season of Homicide, which I'm sure you know better now, was like a half season, right? It was a replacement show. And Jean didn't shoot the first season. I don't know who did, a different cinematographer.
Right. That was Wayne Ewing. Yeah, Wayne Ewing shot the first, and it was 9 episodes. Yep.
Yeah, they threw the rule book out the window. And although I like to push the boundaries and I like, outrage and doing what you haven't seen before, I didn't like when I looked at the whatever episode they sent me. I mean, there was no continuity. In the first season, they didn't, if the actors, okay, you shot a take, the actors would decide, they wouldn't even go back to the chair for take 2 that they started in. They go sit in a different chair on the other side of the room. Well, when that thing was cut to that, I couldn't watch that first. See, it was just, I love Jean's handheld work, but Jean's handheld work is almost equivalent to Steadicam. It's not, if you leave Jean to his own devices, it's not shaky. It's not shaky cam. And this was shaky cam. And I was like, I don't think I want to do this show. It doesn't appeal to me. And I turned him down, even though I needed a job badly. So fine. The time passed, then the second season came and they contacted my agent again. Scott Yassel, he says, Gail Mutrix would really like you to come and do an episode. And I go, but the cinematography drives me nuts. I don't know, and he'll no, they hired a new cinematographer. And I go, oh, well, who? And he goes, this guy named Jean de Zaganzek. I said, I'll do it.
That's crazy. What a great bunch of coincidences. I love it. That's great.
And it was based upon Jean being the cinematographer that I took the job.
So you knew right away that the look would coincide with the way you might want it to look when you went into direct.
We got along well. Mm-hmm. I knew, God, I don't know anybody in any profession in the world that works harder than Jean worked. Mm-hmm. Just indefatigable. Can't slow him down. I mean, when we did the feature film together, one night we wound up working like 20 hours or something. And, Jean wanted this. It was like the crew was ready to murder me and everything else. And Jean wanted, you could see his eyes were going like this, but he was shooting with a Aeroflex 35 with 100, with a 1,000-foot mag, which has to weigh 75 pounds, the whole rig. And he's wanting to keep going at 3 a.m. And I said, the only way you could stop this guy is to hit him with a baseball bat. He just, no,
What
that's
film
it.
was that? What was that?
It's called Normal Life. Luke Perry and
Oh,
Ashley.
okay. Sure. I didn't know Jean shot that.
Jean. It's beautifully shot. Anyway, so I, accepted the job. And I was, because I didn't want to be a TV. I mean, in those days, there was a little bit of onus of, if I'm a filmmaker, not a TV director. But the group of people and the act, everything, and with Jean, okay, cool, well, I'll do this. And then when I got to Baltimore, I just fell in love with Baltimore and the people. It was so much like the South Side of Chicago where I
Great
grew
bunch of characters, right?
yeah, unpretentious characters,
Yes.
crazy characters, but they were good at what they did. And they
what
were
a
fun
great
to stand
backdrop for the show right there on Thames Street where our sets were, to have that beautiful cobblestone street. I mean, crazy.
I loved Fells Point. I loved Baltimore. I just thought it was the coolest place. And so visual.
Yes, totally. So, and real. So you came in on A Many Splendored Thing, but the thing I found, we rewatched all the episodes. The thing that I thought was really interesting about you jumping in on that particular episode, which I'm sure they didn't think, oh, let's get John for that episode. It just happened to be that episode.
Yeah.
Was that episode really, one of the themes was dealing with your bad side, and that everybody has the potential to be good or bad, and you have both those things in you together, which to me is like so much about what Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, was about. So when you came in, when you saw the script before you came in, and then you have a week of pre-production and then shooting and then post-production, did any of that sort of like, oh, I know this theme, I understand this because I just did a film about that, like super raw film about that. Did that sort of go through your head or not? I mean, you could tell us about how it was coming into the show and how that experience was.
Once I hit Baltimore, I sort of hit the ground running. I mean, you got 1 week of prep. And I think it was one of the things, because they were using Jean, because they were shooting in Baltimore, out of the New York, LA axis, they were able to, I think it was a 7-day schedule as opposed to the normal series. Our series
7.
was 8. So it was fast paced, and I was thrown in. And it was interesting when I did Henry, I got 3, I hate to call them fan letters, but sort of. One was from John Waters saying how much he liked the film. One was from David Mamet saying how well directed he thought the film was. And one was from Eric Bogosian. And I would go on to make a film with Eric Bogosian. I would go on to shoot a film that David Mamet wrote. And I got to know John Waters a little bit from hanging around with all the people. I mean,
and he was in one of your episodes. We have to talk about that, if that was happenstance or not.
And, I hit it off I just got along with the Baltimore people and found out little by little that most of them had worked on John's pictures. That's where they came up. That's where they learned. I became very good friends with Vince Pranio and his wife, Dolores Deluxe. Pat Moran and I became very good friends.
Yeah. And we just interviewed Brooke Yaton and Jeff Gordon the other day, who say hi. They give you the hi.
I'm still in touch with them. Again, they were very much like people from Chicago to me. As Anthony Bourdain said, Chicago is the no bullshit zone. I love New York. I love LA, but there's so much in the movie business. There's so many lies and bullshit and backhanding and backslapping and backstabbing. It's like I say, in New York and LA, they'll stab you in the back. In Chicago, they'll punch you in the face and you'll see it coming. And okay, I'll take that personally, because I can duck. but anyway, so I loved Fells Point. I remember the first day I just took a walk, and there was the next street over was a little commercial street with all these funky old business. My favorite, I always loved bait shops. Where they sell, if there's water near, in Chicago, we have Lake Michigan. When I was a kid, there were bait shops. There are no more. And you go and buy minnows and worms.
Bucket of worms.
Yeah. But there was a bait shop in Fells Point with this hand-painted sign, triangular sign out in front. It said blood worms. And I think I took a picture of that sign because it was so cool. But anyway, the script, I remember, to me, I always spent a lot of time with this. I've been a reader all my life, and I spent a lot of time with the script, and I made extensive notes for Tom Fontana. And I expected he would just like, oh yeah, and change everything to my taste. And he handed me, I got the script back a day or so later, and maybe 10% of what I asked for was done. The rest was, here's your changes, John. This is our show. You get out there and direct it, please. And, so I was kind of, so the theme, I didn't, to me, it was just like, get out and do it. Cause there wasn't a lot of time to think about it. And the good news was the first week was spent so much scouting. And I was out with Vince and who was the location woman? She was the young woman then. She became the film commissioner of Baltimore.
Deb Donaldson.
Yeah, she was,
Hi, Deb.
I couldn't think of more fun than to ride with Vince and Deb around Baltimore and whomever. They had great Teamsters also, by the way. Which one? One of the Teamsters was Shelley's brother. Oh, by the way, the first assistant director, Michelle Ziegler Shelley, was the best AD I've ever worked with. I took her on a couple of more projects. No, I've never known anyone to match her.
Yeah, Kenny was her brother, one of the drivers.
Yeah,
and she is still out there doing huge movies.
There are good Teamsters, there are not so good Teamsters. And coming up in working class, I generally get along pretty okay with the Teamsters. But the Baltimore Teamsters I forget the guy that ran the Teamsters, but he was pretty cool.
Ford Wilgus.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, those guys, I would always marvel at.
Jimmy's buddy.
They could haul, like a honey wagon or 40-footer down the street and like back it into a tunnel because we had a lot of the trucks parked in the tunnel under the sets. Like, just amazing. They were amazing Teamsters.
They were really good. So anyway, so we'd ride around with Vince and Deb and, and I get a sightseeing tour of Baltimore, all these great locations and cool neighborhoods and just great architecture. And it was fabulous and with cool people. And then we'd always stop somewhere great. They knew all the great places to stop to have lunch, all the neighborhood joints. And it was fabulous. And then, then I met the actors.
Yeah, after that pre-production, when you hit the set with this, already tuned in ensemble cast.
And I could get them to rehearse. If you're really serious, you will want to rehearse. They laughed at me. Yeah, we're going to rehearse. Beat it. Okay.
Rehearse with the camera rolling at 7 a.m.
Exactly.
At call time. Right.
So, and anyway, I met them, and I was brought out on the set. I forget who was directing the episode.
So that must have been quite intimidating meeting the cast in that way. What was that like, and how did you overcome that? Because there's obviously a lot of personalities and people who've got established characters, etc., and probably unwilling to take notes from a director.
You do. Yeah. Again, I learned very quickly that because I'd never done a television show before. On a feature film, the director's in charge. The director's the boss. But in a motion, I got into it. And I didn't get into it, but one day we were running, running and gunning, and we had a shot in a morgue, and we were running a little behind. So we come in there, and I'm just in a hurry, and I go, okay, Kyle, you stand here, and I forget who else was. Clark, you stand over here and you come in this way and ready? Okay, John, ready? Okay. And then Kyle goes, well, John, I'm not going to do that. And I'm going, and my mind is turning. I'm thinking I'm on the set of a movie. You're not, you're fired. And then my mind goes, can't fire a series regular. He could fire you, John. Okay, Kyle, what would you like to do? Well, I'm going to come, okay, action. Let's go. Let's shoot. Yeah. It was like, you don't have time. Make it work. Shoot it. And it's just such a great training ground, a great education for how, for later. It's just like, because I've seen directors, especially they've done small indie films and stuff. Oh, they're Federico Fellini. They're a genius, and let's try the nothing gets done. No. Set it up. No, you don't want to do that. What do you want to do? You want to do that? Okay, we'll do it. Unless it's just worthless, and it wasn't. And we shot it, and we got the scene, and we're back on schedule and back in the world to the next scene. So, the one thing that the actors, I got along with all of them. I liked them all very much. They were all very gifted, mostly, and some of them were exceptionally gifted. Richard Belzer, for instance, I used him also in Mad Dog and Glory, introducing to be a comic on stage in a comedy club.
Mm-hmm.
But it just so happened while we were editing, Richard was we were editing in Times Square at the Brill Building, and across the street was a famous comedy club, Caroline's. And Richard was headlining over at Caroline's and invited myself and editor and producer Steve Jones to come see him. So we went over that evening, and I had to put my hands over my ears because I was getting sick from laughing so hard. I thought I was going to have to call an ambulance. I mean, Richard Belzer, he gets started and just like one after, it's, oh my God, that guy was funny and quick. So anyway, and Yaphet Kotto was a fucking great actor. Andre Brower was I used to love scenes with Andre and Yaphet together because they were like frenemies.
Yeah.
Andre was the young one coming up. Yaphet was the older, being challenged. And you get scenes together between them, and it'd be like fireworks because they were trying to beat each other. But in the end, they were both smart enough and gifted enough to realize the talent of the other. And although they could be cranky, they also had great respect for each other. And directing those two guys in scenes together, that was wonderful stuff.
Crazy. Chris, I know one of Chris's favorite episodes is Stakeout.
Yeah, brilliant.
And if you remember the one,
the ones I did.
Yeah, could you talk about that? Because I rewatched that again. I've watched it multiple times, but I rewatched it again this morning. Those scenes, particularly like you just mentioned, those scenes between Yaphet and Andre are, I think, some of the best, not just on TV, some of the best acting I have ever seen. And a lot of it was shot in literally like this, like in super close-ups. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because in that scene, they sort of both broke down their barriers, and they were very open about their vulnerabilities in that scene. Andre was having some stress and vulnerable about anticipating having a baby, and Yaphet's character G was anticipating going to his daughter's wedding, who he was going to be late for, and he had mixed feelings about because his daughter hadn't told him. He didn't know the guy she was marrying. And it was this beautifully vulnerable scene. Also, the fact that it's two incredibly intelligent, mature Black actors having this beautiful, vulnerable scene with each other. Could you talk about how that was to direct? Because it is absolutely stunning piece of filmmaking.
So Stakeout, it was a good script, but it was in the dead of winter, and it was the worst blizzard in 1,000 years. It hit from Chicago to Baltimore and through New York. So I know that I believe they had to shut down production in Baltimore for a couple of days. It was just insane. Chicago got a lot of snow, but Baltimore got even a lot more. And so I had to postpone, and finally, so I get to the airport, and the airport, O'Hare Airport, the world's busiest airport, it was pandemonium in there because of the snow. And I think I had to wait 12 hours to get to till the flight left, and got into Newark. And, it was the same thing. It was snow everywhere. And there was no flight into Baltimore. I had to get to the Newark train station and take a train from Newark to Baltimore. So it was, it was late. It was after midnight, and they had a car for me, and took me to the Newark train station in those days. Was a good place to get murdered, basically. And I got in the Newark train station, and it was crowded with people because the trains were running so slowly and everything. And there were some really skeevy characters in that train station that night. It was okay. And the last, the trains were. Is the train still running? Is the train not running? We go back and did blah blah, and so. I forget. I almost missed that train, and there wasn't another for a long time. And I got up on the platform just in the nick of time, got on that train. I think I had to stand for most of it because the train was so packed. And, you could see looking out the windows, the snow was up to, and the train was going very slow so it took a long ass time to get from Newark to Baltimore. And I finally got to Baltimore, and it was like, oh, thank God, and et cetera, et cetera. And Baltimore was just snowed in. It was insane. But waiting for me at the gate, at the platform, was Ford the Teamster and Jimmy Finnerty. And it was like,
Great. Jimmy, they both got there. I love it.
Yeah, there they are. And Finnerty, of course, thought it was all very humorous. And so then they took me to the hotel, actually to the apartment that was on Fells Point there, and that they kept for directors. And, then we go scouting. Well, we go scouting, the same thing. It's, the blizzard's over, but the snow is just insane everywhere. The traffic, crazy.
2 feet. 2 feet of snow minimum, yep.
Yeah. And so what was interesting, but by the time we got to the last scene of shooting, which was, I think, Yaphet getting on the plane at the airport to go to his daughter's wedding, the snow was almost all melted. So it didn't match. But anyway, that was quite an adventure just getting there for that episode.
Yeah, when we talked to the production office women, they said that Yaphet made a real effort he was trying to drive down. I think he had somebody with him, didn't he? Somebody was with, anyway, he was driving down, and then at some point he was giving them updates every hour. I'm on such and such a highway. And he finally had to go, pull off and go to a hotel because he couldn't get any farther. So yeah, that was one of the major challenges of that episode. That's for sure.
But we made it. And but yeah, the good news about that episode is almost most of it took place in that one location. So that worked in our favor. And but it was just a really good episode, and it was all about the acting and the characters. There was again, because it was one interior. And the other thing too is it was a cool house, and the lady who owned it, she was a cool person. So it was just, there were such great locations in Baltimore. Same with Chicago.
That was with Kate Walsh, the woman that played the.
I brought Kate Walsh. She came out of Chicago theater.
Yeah,
I personally fought to get her and
did you really? I wondered about that.
And Jim True Frost, who's now Jim True Frost. He took his wife's maiden name as part of his name, but Jim Frost. Those two were like two of the leading lights of Chicago, the young hotshots in Chicago theater. And I saw Kate Walsh at a theater called the Remains Theater. I forget what the play was, and I just go, who is this? This person is an actor. So I campaigned to get them onto the show. I think it was their first TV role.
And so how much with those two guys, so obviously, I think every detective on the show was rotated through that script in the house because they were staking out another serial killer, a serial killer next door. But specifically with Yaphet and Andre, how much did you do as a director to get to those performances? Was there a bit of like more, or be softer, or be more vulnerable? Or are they so set in their characters and their backgrounds that was sort of inherent in how they were going to approach that scene?
I would say probably, I didn't get to do a lot of in-depth directing because of the schedule. We just had to keep moving. The good news being they were all wonderful actors, and they'd all, all the work they'd done together. But an interesting thing is one of the things you always hope didn't happen to you is you had them all together in one scene because they'd carry you to it. It was like a
Mayhem.
pack of wild dogs. They have with the prey, the director. Here we go. That could be. I got away pretty easy on that count, but I remember. I think it was a British director. I'm trying. Who was a really good director? He had a big scene of them, and I remember he came out. It looked like he'd been in a prize fight. He'd been in a fight with Sonny Liston or somebody. They beat him up.
Oh, so were you overlapping with him? Was he directing while you were pre-production? Did you run into him?
Yeah, different. You got to meet other directors too, which was cool. Because one would be directing, you'd be on prep. Then when you'd be directing, the next one was on prep. So a lot of great, interesting, cool directors on that show. But Yaphet and Andre, like I say, I think they just had this thing. Andre was the young one coming up to take the thunder from the old master. And I mean, when you look at Yaphet's movie credits, it's insane who he worked with. Everybody.
Crazy. I saw a Western a while ago, like from 1978, and this person comes into the scene in the middle of some saloon in this Western town and serves the guys that are playing poker, and he goes out of the scene, and I was like, that was Yaphet.
Yeah.
And he had a fairly large part in that, but that was in like 20 years before Homicide.
I
Crazy.
mean, he started to where a lot of the old time Hollywood kings and queens were still working, and he worked with a lot of them. So he was amazing. And but here comes the future, the next generation, and you're getting old, Yaphet, and here comes the young. And so there was this natural between them, and a jealousy for both understanding the quality of the work the other was capable of, and their talent. So like I said, those were some of my fondest memories of working with that pair, because the sparks flew. I mean, those guys together, they had to one up each other. They had to keep the game way up at the top.
I was just going to ask you, was that part of it? Was that recognizing each other's talent? And did that make them even better when they were in scenes with each other?
They were challenging each other, and you had to rise to keep up. They were quite a pair. I also with Andre. I mean, his wife was an actor, and I got to do a couple scenes with them in one episode. With them play in their where they supposedly lived as a couple, and she was she was a professional. I don't know if she was in government or whatever, and he was he was a cop, et cetera, et cetera. But the scenes with those two, it was like Tracy and Hepburn. They were really charming. And I had a couple of scenes with them, and I just thought, man, that was really fun. Those two together, they were really good together.
Yeah,
So,
and the great thing about that particular scene I'm thinking of in one of your episodes, I remember, I think it was Partners, and one of the ones, he had turned his badge in because he was being sued by another serial killer, the serial killer who had killed all the women, the White Glove murders. And he turns his badge in because of the way that turned out. I think it was that reason. In any case, so he's home, not being a cop, driving her crazy. And the scene in the kitchen with them was absolutely...
That was the scene.
Yeah.
Now, like I said, it was like
Great
Tracy
scene.
and Hepburn. I mean, they had the charm and the timing and the give and take back and forth. It was really a fun scene. I was very proud of that scene.
Yeah, and you wonder how much was brought from their own relationship, like how the sort of the comfort, but also maybe some of that, the little tension things going on.
Yeah.
Really great stuff. Really, really 5 really standout episodes. And you did so many episodes. You and only, I think Jean directed 6, and I think there were 4 other directors that directed 6, and Ken Fink, I think, did the most at 8. But that's a pretty good chunk of episodes. Although we shot 120, hardly any directors shot that many episodes. Did you get a feel for why they kept bringing you back? Were they really happy with your stuff? Did they like the way you worked? Did the actors like you to come back? Or
I got along great with pretty much everybody. And I remember after doing my first episode, A Many Splendored Thing, is that it? Whatever.
That's the one. Yep, that's the one.
Fontana wouldn't tell me this, but somebody told me this, and I don't remember who it was, that after that episode, they would show it to the incoming directors and say, this is what we want the show to be like. And look at this. So I will also tell a little anecdote. I think it was on that one. It was Ned Beatty, and what was he was his girlfriend? What's her name? Marguerite?
Oh, Juliana Margulies.
Yeah, I think it may have been one of her very first jobs. She was lovely.
Yeah, she's great.
And, Ned and I, the only actor I ever got into it with a little bit was Ned, and it was in this scene, and we made it up, and we were fine afterwards. But they had a big scene in a restaurant with many of the actors and having dinner together, and Margulies and Ned, and at some point something happened, in the world, and Belzer comes to the door of the restaurant and said, "Hey, to Beatty's character, we got something going on here, this, that, the other thing." But it was a very long scene with conversation and witty and humor and funny and cool. And so Jean and I, probably more Jean than I, came up with this idea. We built a dolly track in a 360-degree circle around that table. It was big. It was a big table with a lot of actors. And then we rehearsed, and we had it all laid out to do in one shot. And Jean had this thing he called the butt dolly, and it was just like a little skateboard, a piece of plywood with wheels on it that went on those
famous
tracks.
butt dolly. Yes.
And he pedaled it with his feet. So he was going around and around and around and back and forth, and then and to get this piece of dialogue and that piece of dialogue and a continuous take. And then when Belzer comes to look up and grab Belzer just at the instant, he's blah, 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 and then come back for the reaction from Beatty, etc. And, that was, and it was numerous pages. It was longer scene. So we were rehearsing, and they were starting to get some flack about, you're taking too much time here, and this, blah, blah, blah. I go, yeah, but once we got it, so finally, I don't know how many takes we did it, and then finally, bang, we got it. And it was just, to me, perhaps the best scene I've ever shot in anything, because Jean just did it. And when I saw it, and I watched the episode when it was broadcast, they chopped it up, and it just broke my heart. But that's showbiz, as we say.
Right, because they wanted to have that a little. They wanted to. I don't want to say they wanted to have lots of jump cuts, but they wanted a different energy than if it was all in one take like that. And that was an incredibly, kudos to you, incredibly complicated scene, because it started with Melissa and Jelko, who was her boyfriend at the time, and then Juliana and Ned. And then, like you said, Belzer comes in, and then, because there was a whole scene with them first, and then Belzer comes in and sort of breaks the romance, because it's supposed to be a romantic dinner, because Ned's trying to woo Juliana Margulies. And then it cuts after the commercial, I think, to Belzer sitting down with them, and everybody, the restaurant's empty, everybody's gone, and he's talking about his life and his, he just broke up with his girlfriend and his sad sack thing, and the Juliana Margulies is really empathetic. She doesn't know him, so she's really empathetic with what's going on. But it was incredibly complex scene. And so I was thinking, when you were talking about that, the butt dolly and using the circular track, how much of the communication, because you'd worked with Jean before and you trusted his camera work, which was different than anybody else was doing in television, how much of did you have almost like a implicit sort of unspoken dialogue, because you trusted what he was going to do with the camera? How did that work, back and forth with Jean and the way the show was shot?
Again, like I say, I'd had experience working with him in Chicago. So not extensive, but we had worked together. Oh, and he shot a music video for me in Chicago too, 16 millimeter film years and years ago. That turned out really well. And I was really nervous, because up to that point, I'd been shooting mostly all video where I had a monitor, but this was 16 millimeter handheld, Jean's camera. And I was really nervous about shooting film without being able to, I'd without a monitor that I could see. And I figured if I had Jean, I was good. I didn't have to see it till we saw the dailies. Anyway, but Jean and I had we just had a connection, and I didn't have to say a lot to it. We agreed mostly, and we thought in similar terms. So I loved working with him. It was very easy for me. And I've worked with some of the world's greatest cinematographers in movies, and that I didn't get along with personally at all, because they tend to be, especially in the days of film, you have to be almost anal retentive, because it's in terms of dirt and and all it's just also can be so fussy, and cinematographers can be so picayune, and some of the world's greatest cinematographers and I didn't get on very well personally. Jean and I are friends to this day.
He was just absolutely delightful to work with.
I mean, I did a TV show with him years later, and the producers were on set, and we were shooting a scene in a jail cell, and he was hand holding it, and we were just saw the monitor, but they couldn't see him working. They could only see the camera. And what was, and after we'd done a rehearsal and they seen the shot, and I said, okay, I'm going to tell you something. What you just saw was handheld. And they went, no, it wasn't. I go look in that jail cell and see what, and there's Jean with the camera on his shoulder. Cause he, like I say, he could shoot handheld where you didn't tell it was handheld. I think he was one of the absolute greatest handheld cinematographers alive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And were there any other standout out of your 5? So your 5 episodes were Many Splendored Thing was the first one, and then the second one, season 3, A Model Citizen. That was the one with Joe Morton, who was the editor of the black newspaper who gets murdered.
Yeah,
that's a terrific one, and also the one with Emma Zool, and where we started sort of injecting sex into the show with Emma Zool and Kyle's character, Tim Bayliss, and then Partners, the one with Al Freeman Jr., who plays this sort of martinet police commander.
was good.
And ends up, in a court case with Andre. And Law and Disorder was the one where they brought John in as a part of the crossover episode with Law and Order, where Chris Noth brings John Flores into Penn Station,
murder suspect,
as a murder suspect. So did you ask for John? Do you know how John ended up on the show? Because we were thinking about getting him on here too at some point.
Like I said, I became good friends with Pat Moran. I became good friends with Vince and Dolores also, but I became, I'm a great story with Pat, because I used to love working with her, because she'd find so many, the local people she'd find were so great. Who was the New York casting director? He's a big famous guy.
DiGiamo.
He was good. He really was good. But working locally with Pat, I just remember one time when we would look for background, we would find, just the skeeviest characters, and there were plenty of them in Baltimore, and just to populate the backgrounds with some real local color and stuff. And we were looking at people one time, and I remember she goes, I know what you like, McNaughton. You're just like me. You like the monsters, because we get these monstrous looking people to be in the backgrounds of scenes. So I would socialize with that crew too. And, Pat and John were very close. So we all went, I was invited over to John's house for cocktails one afternoon, and et cetera, et cetera. And it was just so, but no, it wasn't my idea to cast him in that. I think they just did, Pat probably set that, and would be my guess. Pat set that up. And their interesting story there, we're shooting in the old train station, which was gorgeous. And so NBC, they're trying to do this crossover. They've got the 2 of their shows. They got Homicide and they got Law and Order, and got Chris Noth coming in. They're sort of cross-pollinating there. And but they have John and they have Chris Noth, and it's publicizable for them. So they send this photographer. And I'm trying to talk to John, about the scene and what, you go here and you do this and that, the other. And this photographer's taking pictures and he was just a dick. And he started, here's the director talking to the actor, preparing to shoot the scene. And he goes, "Could you step out of the way? Could you get out of the way, please?" And I just said,
No.
I think Kennedy was there. I said, "Get him out of here right
my
now,
God.
right now." We kicked him off the set. It was just like, if you want me to move, I'm happy to move. I'm happy to, want to shoot a picture, John, be my guest, but have some manners, buddy, or else you're out of here. And we kicked him out.
And yourself, you having been a photographer and having, been shooting characters and people on the street, I imagine that was even more irritating as being a photographer.
You don't tell
right?
you don't be rude to the director. That's a
No.
losing, it shows me you don't know what you're doing. So anyway, but having John, it was fun directing John and Chris Noth too. I mean, it was a fun scene.
Yeah, it was a very good scene. That was a very good scene. Any other sort of standout moments for you across your sort of 5 episodes?
Oh, I just would say one other thing. I forget which episode it was, but there was a child involved. This little kid, Gordy, I think was his name. And when he came in for his audition, he couldn't have been more than 8 years old. And we came in for his audition. His mom, he had to have she had a T-shirt that said, "I'm Gordy's mom," because Gordy was the star of the family. But I learned from my auditioning those children, and especially Gordy, who got the role. When I read this, the dialogue was not children's. It was just fairly complex to give to a child of that age. And I thought, where are we going to find a kid who's going to be able to do this and do it believably? Well, we found at least 3 that were, which sort of amazed me. I mean, Gordy was the one we chose. I believe Gordy is, I may be misremembering, but I do remember him sitting in the audition with his sides, he's this little guy and he's got this little thing and he's doing his, and it occurred to me at that point that here's proof that we are born with gifts. Because here's this little guy, he hasn't studied, he hasn't been acting, he just, and with actors, I read this great book with interviews with actors and how they, and it always, how did you know? They all know when they're like, 5, they just know. And that this little, he read off his pen, he read his body, I go, where does that come from? Again, that's not training, that's not learn, that's gift that you're born with. It's in you somehow. And it just was such proof that we're born with gifts. And it was kind of a revelatory moment for me as I remember it.
Interesting. I have to go back and look and see who that was because we had a number of child actors or probably weren't actors on the show from time to time who have gone on to continue acting, and some of them are producing now. So really, even at that, like we had a 7-year-old in one episode with John Seda that just was absolutely terrific kid, and he's stayed in the business all these years. But yeah, I agree with you that at that age, there's some weird natural gift that's there because you wouldn't be able to learn that right at that age.
There was a scene he had a scene in a parking lot out and they were in, I think somebody had been killed or something, and they were interviewing witnesses or something like that, and that's where his scene was that I remember.
Oh, it might have been with the where is the and I just watched all these. You think I'd remember the where the woman's grocery shopping because she gets shot in the grocery store parking lot.
Law and Disorder, yeah.
Law and Disorder. That was a good one. And also Valerie Perrine was another
she was
one of the guest stars who had a small part as a photographer.
Well, she was trying to come back into the business. She'd had, I mean, like so many people, the business eats people up, especially in Los Angeles. And she'd had a, huge career and then spun out. And so she was very nervous about it. But once, you treat them well and show that you support them, surrounded by supportive people. And she was totally cool. And it was great to work with her.
Yeah, that was a nice little part.
Adrienne Shelley, I just loved working with. We became friends. And she eventually directed a movie and came to Chicago with it and invited myself and Steve Jones to come and see it. I really liked her. I thought she was a tremendously gifted and cool person. And it was, as we know, tragic what happened to her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just shocking. Shocking that for listeners that don't know, she played Tanya in the episode, in your first episode in A Many Splendored Thing. She played the clerk in the store where they go to look for the murderer, and that she eventually brings a black leather jacket to the squad room for Bayless, for Kyle's character, which was also interesting. And I don't know how much directors, you guys knew this at the time. That was a turning point episode for Kyle, where he's like this sort of goodness and light, naive person. And he starts in that episode to look into his dark side. But that was the episode with Adrienne Shelley, who was murdered in her apartment building in 2006, I think it was, right after she'd made Waitress.
Yeah.
Just really, just absolutely shocking. But interesting story arc. His story arc of him, of Kyle's story arc that started in your episode, your first episode, continued through the whole series of his not just exploring his dark side, but then actually by the end of the series, he becomes sort of the dark character. And after Andre's stroke, Andre becomes sort of the naive character. It's a weird crossover arc between their two, and huge over those 7 years. But to see it start that early with your first episode, I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, we got to work. What was it called, the block? That
Yeah, you were on the block. Yes.
Yeah, that was.
Mhm.
I really enjoyed that as a location.
Yeah, for listeners who don't know, Baltimore had, and it used to be larger, but an area with strip clubs and lots of prostitution and all that stuff. Interestingly enough, used to be, I don't know if it is anymore, the headquarters for the Baltimore City Police Department. This was on Baltimore Street, was on the same block, next block over from the block. And at some point in time, there was an effort to get rid of all of it. And there was some decision that they didn't want that to spread to other elements and other parts of the city. So this is what my recollection is. The city decided to retain those 2 blocks, which we call the block, so that commerce, the strip joints and all that, could stay there, which is interesting. But it's also extremely colorful. Yeah, colorful area. I shot a film in film school, driving down the block. So it was an absolutely iconic part of Baltimore. And they used some of the real people in your episode. It was
Pat, but we'd always use, I mean, for like, a waitress in a coffee shop, Pat would find a waitress in a coffee shop, and, I wouldn't want them to do long and lengthy scenes, but they could do, how was everything? And they would be so believable because that's who they were. And she'd find those people, and I loved working with those people because they were just so real. And it's fun to me. Actors can be a pain, but we're real people. Well, what should I do? Well, just be yourself. Be cool. Just say what. And there were numerous times when Pat would bring in people that, like I say, that you wouldn't want them to do Shakespeare, but you could get them to be who they were. In a scene. Oh, what was the guy? I like it. The pen. The guy that was. What was the episode where they came into his apartment? He had all those
Gosh,
pens.
the
hanging
Oh,
from the kid,
yes.
and then he was on
Yeah.
the roof with that guy. Same thing. He was an ordinary person. He wasn't an actor, but he was perfect for that one thing.
Yes. And also in A Many Splendored Thing, when Pembleton and Bayless go to the sex phone company, and you're sort of, as they're coming into the room where the men and the women are doing their jobs, doing phone sex and using their scripts, and you go through the characters, and they're all they make sense. They sort of fit in the characters, and you can hear what they're saying and their sort of personalities. When you get to the end of the line, there was a woman, an older woman, probably in her 60s, with a beehive, like gray and brown beehive hairdo, sitting at the end with a cigarette, And she doesn't do anything, but like the woman next to her says, I don't have the script for such and such while she's on the phone. She can't find the script for the shower scene or something. And she turns to the woman at the end of the line. And that woman was so Baltimore. And all she does is turn around and pass the script to the next person. I'm like, oh, it's just like hit the nail on the head. It was like perfect for that scene and that location, and like the perfect Baltimore woman employees. It was like really terrific. And like you said, Pat knew where to find everybody.
One of my favorite places in Baltimore was Food Town. Did you know?
Oh, where's that?
It was right off of Fells Point on a main street. It was a grocery store, Food Town. And
oh, grocery store. Okay.
Yeah. And I would go there. And first of all, I love the name, a grocery store called Food Town. And to me, I imagined that there was a secret ray coming that was on a satellite in the sky that shone down on the block of Food Town. And if the world's most beautiful woman was walking down that block, the minute she got under that ray on her way into Food Town, she would start to turn into this, hideous, hag, horrible character. And that's everybody in Food Town was like deformed, just missing their teeth.
Those are real people,
Yes,
right? Real people.
And you see mothers just smacking their kids in the head. I mean, I would just go to Food Town and push a cart around it was always something amazing, crazy happening. I loved Food Town. It was just a nut house. Pat Moran, it was a favorite place of hers. I know.
Amazing. When you moved on to other TV series or other films, were there any similarities between that work on Homicide? Did you take, like some of our directors talk about really loving taking the mobile camera idea with them, although many places don't put it into the handheld mode. We don't want to see that. But things that you took with you from working on Homicide?
I made a whole film with John shooting handheld, mostly handheld, except he was dragging that Aeroflex around, which is a big piece of gear.
Those are not fun. Well, some people love working with those cameras.
I see that skinny Frenchman out there with that. I'm surprised he's permanently bent from that. But yeah, but the thing is, when I worked with John, they wanted a lot of motion. I didn't. I when we had to move the camera, he would just, you could hardly tell it was handheld, and so many, because he was so good at it. But it just makes things go faster. And now everything is various kinds of rigs with cameras getting smaller and smaller. It's interesting to see, and even big studio, I mean, the big pictures, how much of that type of work there is going on these days as compared to those days. So I very much enjoyed working like that, especially when the budgets were smaller. When the budgets were bigger, fine, get the Panavisions and the 200 millimeter lenses and a blah blah Panavision, the CinemaScope 235, a wide blah blah blah, and it's great. I love doing it, but I also love working that down and dirty, fast and loose, and get it done. Shoot. And working with John was, like I said, I took John with me on 2 more TV pilots, and then Shelley Ziegler on a couple too. There were great people on that show.
And the film you did with Jean, was that Normal Life, wasn't it? The film you did with Jean?
Yep.
Yeah.
I had Brooke on a TV pilot I did in Los Angeles. I'm trying to remember what it was. I can't remember exactly. It'll come back to me. I remember us being out in the Hollywood Hills late one night. It was Lansky, an HBO movie that David Mamet wrote and shot by.
Really? I really want to see that.
And shot by my favorite cinematographer next with Jean, but entirely different. John A. Alonzo, who shot Chinatown, who shot everything.
I worked with John for years.
God, I love John.
With Scarface and a number of other. Yeah, that looks like, I love mob films, and I have got to see that. I got to see that film.
Well, it was a great script. I mean, Mamet has, gone off in the direction he's gone off, and et cetera. It's his business. But the writing, I mean, that script, I basically I could have done a James Bond picture, and I had already committed to, because the producer of Lansky was married to Barbara Broccoli. Fred Zolo was married, and they were both friends of mine in those days. But I'd committed to do Lansky, and at a event at their home one night, Barbara approached me about the upcoming Bond picture. I couldn't do it.
Oh wow, was that been The World Is Not Enough? I guess that was 1999. Yeah.
I don't remember. It was not. It was before what's his name? It was.
Because Pierce Brosnan was that era for the 90s. Was that the one?
Daniel Craig, before Daniel Craig.
Yeah, before Daniel Craig.
Yeah, so it'd be Pierce. Yeah,
but it wasn't. What's his name? Who you just mentioned?
It was Pierce.
No.
What's his?
Timothy Dalton.
Yes, Timothy.
Wow! Because he did License to Kill. I liked him.
I liked him because he brought once again, John, the dark side. He brought the dark side. But Meyer
you would
Lansky,
have been perfect with Timothy Dalton. Wow!
But Meyer Lansky, played by Richard Dreyfuss, has just got to be terrific. I really need to see that.
Yeah, it was interesting because Mamet, when he heard we cast Richard Dreyfuss, because Richard came Spielberg pictures and all like that, Mamet was not supportive. And then after,
because he always played like Mr. Nice Guy, right? Like in The Goodbye Girl, you don't think it was Meyer Lansky. It's like really cool casting.
I was directly upstairs one floor from where I'm sitting now in my bedroom, and I was watching TV one night. Phone rang, and it was after we'd sent a copy to Mamet for his, so he could see it. And the phone rang, and it was picked it up, and they go, "Hello, John." I go, "Yeah, who's this?" "This Dave Mamet." "Oh, hi, David. I just watched Lansky. It was terrific." And he went on to say he was wrong about Dreyfuss, and that the performance was wonderful. And then I think he wound up hiring him in some theater piece later on. But I think that happened. But he was, after he saw Dreyfuss doing it, he thought he was great. So that was fun when you turn somebody around like that.
Yeah. And probably and he was probably taken more seriously in serious parts as opposed to comedies after that movie, right?
He was, and the script was just really, really good. I mean, David Mamet can write.
I'm going to have to hunt that down because it's not easy to get hold of in the UK, sadly.
No, I don't know where you find it. It was made for HBO. We shot it in 185, actually 178, but all the versions available are over TV. It was still TV before they were showing full frame. Most you can find it's probably in 133 format, which is a shame because John's cinematography is lovely.
So speaking of writing, why do you think, and that's sort of a loaded question since I started it with that, why do you think the show, because the show, if you watch Homicide now, it's, and I've said this a million times in almost every episode when we talk to people, it's not dated. There might be a hairstyle or a jacket or something that looks a little 90s. But in general, the stories, the issues, the things that the detectives are concerned about and dealing with are still relevant. So can you talk a little bit about why, if you've revisited it at all over the 30 plus years later, why it still retains interest in fans 30 plus years later?
Well, I think you'd start with David Simon's book. I mean, he spent time with Baltimore Homicide. I don't know, a lot of time. And those were sort of the key threads that started the series that came from the book, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, absolutely. Every thread. They sucked every piece out of that book.
And, when I first got to Baltimore, one of the first things I did was ride-alongs with Baltimore Homicide. And, I loved doing that. I loved Baltimore. I loved the situations they take us into. I remember one, I don't know what episode it was. It wasn't my first episode. It may have been the second or third. I don't remember. But it was right on the cusp of, it was Labor Day weekend, which is big weekend for the cops because there's a lot of activity. So they picked me up at the hotel and we went out riding around, and shortly we found, there was this big fat biker guy that had been shot by one of his buddies lying on the ground. I remember him holding his wound, and the cops are asking him questions because he was not going to die, but he was shot, seriously. And then we packed up from that one. Then there was the next one, the dead guy. And then when we dealt with that, and then the radio goes off again, and they said, "Mr. McNaughton, we're sorry. We're going to have to take you back to the hotel. It's getting too crazy out here, and you're slowing us down, you know." So, but it was just like Baltimore was just like one murder after one, shooting after another.
It was.
And, so many times, I mean, and other situations, I always loved doing ride-alongs with the cops. I remember I did a show called I think it was called The Street. And it was shot on the streets of Newark, New Jersey. And it was a handheld show. We had an Australian cameraman who was really good at handheld, but it was a half hour, but it was called a strip show. And it was every day. It was 5 days a week. So you went out and you shot 5 episodes in 5 days.
Holy moly. Wow.
We only managed to get 4. But still, but I went riding with the Newark police. Oh, in those days in Newark, it was just insane how crime-ridden and how wild it was out there. And to me, I mean, personally, I love you're probably safe riding with cops. So yeah, show me what's going on. This is amazing. So I love riding with Baltimore Homicide.
Yeah, in one of your episodes, there's a scene with G in the office, and G actually says what that last year's stats were in Baltimore, and it was like 225, which I think wasn't the highest. At some point, it was almost a murder a day in Baltimore. But glad to say, this past year, it's down to like I think it was 120 in 2025. It's some gigantic drop over the past 2 years.
Well, that's good.
So yeah. So anything else you want to talk about, like what you're working on now or got in development?
As always, many things. Joseph Wambaugh was crime writer.
Yes.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Cop writer, right?
Cop writer. A couple of gentlemen in Los Angeles, the two Marks, Mark Schultz, who wrote the script, and Mark Yellen, who's producing, and they optioned a Wambaugh book a while back called Finnegan's Week. And it's about a homicide cop in San Diego and a week in his life. And it's this crime that takes him across the border into Tijuana. And it's, Wambaugh was a good cop writer. He was a cop. And so I'm set up with them. I'm attached to direct that. I'm right now, I'm just finishing up a first draft of a Gothic novel called The Monk, which is Gothic horror, written in 1796, sort of at the beginning of the Gothic literature craze in England that would lead into Dracula and Frankenstein and precursor to,
Yeah, I think I've heard of that for those reasons, because it was a precursor.
So, and what else? Oh, I have a friend named John Lau, who's a writer in LA, and he wrote, I was involved with a screenplay he wrote a few years back. We never got made. It was called What I Did for Deidre. But John called me about a month ago and said he'd rewritten it as a TV show and would I like to read it? And he sent it to me, and it was just fantastic. So I sent it to my agent at Gershon, and I was surprised at how enthused he was. The script is just, the characters are great. It happens. John Lau grew up in Los Angeles in sort of the lower strata of the middle class. And in LA, the unglamorous part of LA, not the rock bottom, but just the sort of struggling folk. And
there's a lot of that. And I lived in LA for 8 years. There's a lot of that you never see on television. Yeah.
John's a great writer. So the Gersh agency is kicking that out there, and we'll see,
That sounds great.
Yeah, it does. Good luck with it.
So, Chris.
Yes, I have a random question I always like to ask people, because Baltimore's very famous for food. You've already mentioned Food Shop, the grocery store, but do you have any food memories of Baltimore, any particular place you like to go?
The crab cakes. Pat Moran took me to some local place with concrete floor, and the waitresses were middle-aged ladies that wore those golden crowns from Burger King hats. And those crab cakes, I think they're, by many aficionados considered the best in town. But I remember years later being in LA at some very schmancy restaurant that they were famous for their crab cakes. And so I ordered the crab cakes and they were okay. But I go, I can get better than this on the corner of tavern in Baltimore any day of the week. And then I remember going with Vincent and Dolores, some grand old hotel, very old school hotel. They had a lovely old school dining room with, linen tablecloth and the waiters in the little red jackets, and the food was fantastic. I mean, Baltimore's the food. And another was a place that was right on this Main Street in Fells Point that had Bertha's or something. The mussels were just like
Yes,
fantastic.
Bertha's Mussels.
Yeah.
Just sold the building last year sometime. It's out of
The food
business now.
in the neighborhood bars was fabulous in Baltimore. And the seafood, being right on the bay. I mean, the food was great. I remember, and the person will go unnamed, I was shooting and another director was coming in prepping, or it may have been the reverse, I don't remember what, but at some point, he sent somebody out for sushi, and the sushi, and he was very unhappy. You can't get good. He was from LA. Can't get good sushi in this city. Blah, blah. And I saw every head of the crew from all the local balls just go, "You're an asshole," and just turn back and go on about their business. It's like, yeah, but you can't get good this, but you can maybe. I'm sure if you look, you could get good sushi.
You
but
could.
Tell you what, you're not going to get certain dishes that this town is famous for. You're not going to get better anywhere on this earth.
Yeah, back in the day, up Charles Street, about probably 10 blocks, there's a place called Kawasaki. And that was, I think, where I first ever had sushi in Baltimore, and it was absolutely terrific. They were known. But yeah, they might have brought over some sushi from John Stevens, which was good. But I think they usually just did veggie sushi there. I'm not sure. But yeah, you're right. Don't complain about the sushi when there's so much other great stuff. Right?
Indeed. Oh, wow. That's been great. It's been fantastic.
Well, John, this has just been terrific. Thank you so much for spending so much time with us. Your stories were absolutely delightful. And really, I think, really gives a good look at how a filmmaker develops and how much it has to do with what their experiences are, right? And I think that your stories really show that, where how you became a director that was really focused on character. And a lot of that had to do with so many characters you came across in your life, in your working life.
Jack Kerouac said, there's that famous quote, I wish I had it in front of me, "The mad ones are for me." And then he goes on to describe why, you hang, and again, to me, the first time I read that quote, I go, yeah, exactly. Those are the fun, the crazy ones. Those are the ones you want to hang out with, at least when you're young.
Yeah.
That's where the fun in life is. And just by coincidence, I happened to see, Jimmy Webb, the songwriter, Up and Away in a Beautiful Balloon, MacArthur Parks and all, Wichita Lineman. I mean, he was a great songwriter. I went to see him Saturday night at the Old Town School of Folk Music. And between him playing his great songs, all solo piano, and he's a brilliant pianist still at 80 years old, he has a little trouble with the high notes at this point, but nonetheless, but in between the tunes, he'd spin these stories. And at the end, he says, my life has been amazing, but what it really, when I remember, what do I remember is the characters, the people. And he hung around with Waylon Jennings and Willie and, I mean, he goes on and on, the people in the business that he knew and hung around with. And he said, that's what made my life valuable to me, was knowing these unique people.
Amazing. Up and Away. That was a big Fifth Dimension hit.
That Fifth Dimension, that song, and him won 14 Grammys.
Amazing. I saw them live here. People in Baltimore will remember the Club Venus. I saw them live at the Club Venus. Wow. Yeah. Great stuff.
I was never his biggest fan, but it was an amazing performance, and it was not at all what I expected. So I had new respect for him.
I'll have to keep my eye out for him. Great. You can't beat live music. You really can't. Well, thank you so much again.
Yeah,
that
John,
was
thank you.
Really,
That's been
really,
awesome.
really, really fun. And just kudos to you for your career, because what a great span of work. And something I heard or read when I was, getting ready to talk to you, when we were getting ready to talk to you, mentioned that you really like not to repeat yourself.
Yeah, I don't.
And that, which really shows in your body of work that how varied and different your work is. So kudos to you for that, because really is a bunch of interesting stuff. So everybody out there, look up John on IMDb.
But that may be changing. So
And check out his films.
I have another project which I won't mention that would. It's not a repetition at all, but it's
Similar to something.
reimagine, it's the beginning to something. It's the end of a story that started a
Gotcha.
long time ago.
Cool.
Cool.
Well, we look forward to seeing that. Well, thank you, John.
All right.
So that was John McNaughton, and what an interview that was. And he's had such a kind of interesting life journey because, the path to being a director is never necessarily a straightforward one. And if anything, sometimes his journey of meeting so many sort of different people, you can see kind of how it's informed his work, and even how certain connections actually led to the creation of his film, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. So it was really, really interesting to listen to. Was there anything that still stood out for you, Susan?
Yeah, I mean, a ton of things, because it's such a great interview.
Yeah.
And he has so many great stories. I loved early on when he talked about the fact that that he didn't go to film school, that he was more interested in art, and then he ended up with a camera in his hand, and that he realized that he'd grown up watching television, and then television were the stories and the storytelling that he grew up with, but that he ended up with a camera in his hand, and he talked about the fact that he realized he loved telling stories with pictures. And that sort of led him up the garden path, as they say, to filmmaking. But having gone through art school and TV school and photography, but also what a great bunch of stories about Chicago and growing up on the South Side, or living sometimes on the South Side. When he came out of college and wanted to get in the film business, this is like 1972. Think about what's going on in 1972 in filmmaking in the United States. It is like we are not on sound stages anymore. We are on the streets. We are out there in the 70s.
It's the age of Taxi Driver and stuff like that.
Yeah, Taxi Driver and French Connection and Panic in Needle Park and all those uber,
Serpico,
realistic on the street stories. So I think about that. We didn't talk about that in the interview, but I think about that time period and the influence of what was happening in film. And you could say even television probably broke open a little bit too. But, interesting that that's what he fell into. And that the whole thing, once again, with people's origin stories about these little tenuous threads that lead people to where they are now. And, if he hadn't timed it out to come back to Chicago and work in his cousin's bar, and that person didn't happen to come in at the same time John was working and throw his business card across the bar and say, "Hey, these guys are making films. I hear you want to be a filmmaker." And him picking that up and giving them a call. And that was the production company that was making the sort of found film footage films, from stuff that was out of copyright. And then ended up having the budget to make Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer later. And then also the happenstance, just that the Village Voice critic happened to be at the screening of the film with, I think his name was Joel Coleman, the artist that did one of the posters for Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. And that his production company wasn't happy with it, and how are we going to distribute this? And it's not a horror film, it's an art film, and all those things. And there's this little tiny screening that the artist who did the poster gives, and a critic from the Village Voice happens to be there, and he writes literally, and you can go online and see how many people later quoted this review. And it was Elliot Stein at the Village Voice who said the best picture of the year. And then it blew up for him. It got attention. It got attention for being for same thing we talked earlier in the intro, breaking rules and pushing the boundaries. I mean, even Roger Ebert gave it like 3.5 stars for being incredibly sort of earthy, on the street, realistic depiction of these horrible people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I said this to John. I mean, I've read this book by John Douglas, who's the guy who kind of founded the FBI Behavioral Science Unit. And obviously there's that David Fincher show that's about that. And the book's called Mindhunter, and it's all about the sort of psychology of serial killers. And it's not an easy read, but what was interesting when watching Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer is just like how quite a lot of that kind of twisted logic played out in that show, and a bit like we were talking off air about another TV show called The Fall with Gillian Anderson, and that also got the psychology of serial killers sort of spot on. It made it very real. Whilst there's a lot of trashy serial killer films out there, there was a lot of sort of 90s films that were just a bit silly. There's one, what was it called? It's got Sigourney Weaver in it. It's just an okay film, but it's not, you're not getting any great insight into serial killers. The other good serial killer film that came out the same year as Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer is Manhunter, which is based on the Thomas Harris book Red Dragon, and is sort of the prequel to Silence of the Lambs. So Henry Portrait of Serial Killers, John mentioned, came out at a time before the term serial killers was normal. It was a kind of a new term that only just came out in, I think it was 1986. So it's a groundbreaking film, and as I said earlier, it's not an easy watch. I've only watched it once, and it was like, whoa, this is intense.
It is intense.
It's definitely not one to watch with your in-laws over or something, because it's graphic. It's very graphic.
And I think that the feeling of it being a real sort of like fly on the wall, watching these people's lives makes it even more upsetting, because it's not dramatized, it's not beautifully lit and heightened. It is just, it sort of presents it, which I think makes it even more disturbing, because that even though it wasn't a documentary about these guys, Henry Lee Lucas and Otis, whatever the Otis guy's name was, last name. But, so even though it wasn't a documentary about them, it still is, presents what serial killers and murderers do in a very harsh, brightly lit kind of presentation.
Yeah. There's some very crazy scenes, and
although I must say the thing with the scene with the video pirate, it's really horribly violent, but it's funny. It's funny.
There is a very dark humor throughout the whole film. Actually, we were talking about the ending earlier, and sort of it's horrendous and funny weirdly funny as well. But amazing film. So definitely worth a watch there. And it's interesting as well, because I remember when we did our first interview with Jean de Segonzac, and like how he nearly was the cinematographer on the film, and in the end felt he was happy he wasn't, because his approach would have been quite different, and felt that the cinematographer who did do Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer ended up doing the kind of the right approach to that film. It's an interesting sort of early Homicide kind of connection to the whole thing.
Yeah, and that they had met years before in the film, I guess, of the film program, where Jean was working with Marian Malzinski, who is a famous, is he Polish? A famous Polish,
Yeah, he was Polish, yeah.
Famous Polish documentary filmmaker. You could look him up. And Jean was working with him apparently at the university after Jean had gotten out of Rhode Island School of Design. And that's where John and Jean first met. So I just love all those happenstancey things. But this background of having worked, I mean, when one of his friends said, I'm going to the Iowa State Fair to work as a carny. I'm like, oh my God, like it has like the best background for being a writer, to work on the biggest. I mean, Iowa State Fair is like one of the biggest state fairs ever, and they made the I don't remember if it was a stage play first or a movie. The movie State Fair is based on the Iowa State Fair.
Okay.
because it's a huge deal. It's like it's a gigantic fair.
Mm.
And then to go to New Orleans and like once again be around a bunch of really interesting characters, just has to be great fodder. Not just when you sit down to pick out like, oh, I'm going to write about some interesting characters, but also just the way real people are and the way real people talk and the things that real people do and the decisions real people make, often the wrong decisions.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that all those things he went through, and also working at the International Harvester factory, working on a factory floor. All those things, just a great background.
Well, also, wasn't that the factory his family had all at some
Yes.
different points, like in World War II and stuff? I was thinking it was such an interesting kind of thing, that as well. It's yeah, it's amazing. The other thing as well, he was talking a little bit about his approach with actors and like how he liked to rehearse with actors, and as the technique he was using, not too dissimilar to Mike Leigh, actually, was where you get all the actors together to go through the script and then let the actors kind of play with the words a bit, try out some things and improvise. But John, wanted to have the writer there because he still wanted the writer to listen to all these things and not necessarily, copy them verbatim, but just decide which things worked, which things didn't, and then update the script just so it gives it a slightly more organic feel and helps some of the actors kind of the dialogue kind of work a bit better with those actors. So that was really interesting. And obviously that doesn't work on Homicide. That was not the approach on Homicide at all. And how John had to adapt to that. So that's very interesting. And as we both were saying, like, there's some amazing performances in Stakeout. It's such an intimate episode. And it's fantastic. So, I think he got very good performances out of everybody in all the shows that he worked on. So, yeah.
Yeah, those, and we talk at length about Stakeout, but I would definitely point people, if you're sort of hopping around looking at episodes and maybe not looking at everything, chronological order, that those scenes between Yaphet and Andre, like I said in the interview, are really best acting all around, not just best TV acting. I mean, just really wonderful stuff, wonderfully written and wonderfully performed by them. I thought it was interesting too that John McNaughton turned down Homicide the first time. Gail Mutrix, contacted his people.
Yeah.
And that as soon as he heard what a weird coincidence that he hears, that Jean is now the DP and somebody that he knew and somebody that he maybe felt a little more comfortable with, the sort of working, he knew he would have a working relationship with him when he stepped into that. And that scene, it's very true. I mean, we did a lot of scenes. He talks about the scene in the restaurant, which was Juliana Margulies and Ned and Jelko and Melissa, and then Richard Belzer comes in. And it was one of those things where we laid the round track all the way around the table. And Jean pushed himself around on the butt dolly in a circle around it and caught every action as it happened, because Jean always knew the script and always knew who was talking next and what was going on. And that John was so happy. We'd gotten this beautifully flowing, one take wonder, which was probably, I think it was broken up into two pieces anyway, because I think there was a commercial in between, and then Richard's at the table. Anyway, and that, of course, it's Homicide. It's not going to be a beautiful one take wonder. We did that sometimes, but not very often. And then when he watched it and when it was broadcast and he saw that it had been chopped up, but that was, that was part of that was the energy of the show, was that kind of cutting. Nevertheless, there's still plenty of moves on that circular track that's worth watching that scene for, the way it was shot.
Yeah, it's a great scene, a very funny scene. And it also ends up at Fort McHenry, which we visited, which is very cool.
And fireworks. And I'm looking at that and I'm going, were those put in, or did we actually have fireworks? Somebody shoot some fireworks? I don't remember. Fireworks that night? That was that was nice. That was interesting, because it was almost like Juliana and Richard were having a bit of a connection there. It was almost a romantic sort of connection between them.
Yeah, maybe had she stayed on longer, you never know.
Yeah, right.
She went on to do ER, I think, after that. So, yeah.
She's terrific. But yeah, I also loved that, and this was probably earlier on in what John was talking about when he hooked up with the people from the Organic Theater Company, and that within the Organic Theater Company there were actors like Dennis Farina and Joe Mantegna and Dennis Franz.
Yes.
And that Joe Mantegna is the one that ended up doing the movie Homicide right before the show, which has nothing to do with the show. That was Joe Mantegna, right?
Yeah. It caused the rights names issues for the show for a bit.
And it is interesting to me that John McNaughton and John Waters had not met until John was a guest star in the episode, in one of John's 5 episodes that he directed, which was one of the crossover episodes with Law and Order. And that he didn't request it. It was somebody that Pat Moran, brought in, because of course Pat's, they're like brother and sister. They've known each other forever. But also interesting to me, they'd never met, because if you want to talk about outsider filmmaking, obviously John McNaughton, and so did John Waters, did more traditionally acceptable films after their initial, edgy outsider films. But the fact that they never crossed paths before that, I thought was interesting, because I think, they sort of, I'm sure, come out of the same school of thought and the same sort of, artistic bent, or, the kinds of things and people they want to do films about. I think we're really similar.
Back to what you were saying about art students, being one of the crazy people. I think John was very interested in people with extreme personalities or distinctive looks and stuff. And I think that's, yeah.
And once he got here, I loved the fact that he said right away that he fell in love with Baltimore as soon as he got here, which was really nice to hear. And how much he loved it, and how much he loved the people. And apologies to whoever shopped at Food Town in the 1990s, because he was a little raw about that. But I think what he's saying is, we're so used to, especially on television and films, is seeing people that are not, that have almost zero recognizable, characteristics of real people. I mean, and then, you get out into the real world, and in the real world where there are people that, that aren't able to go to the doctor, or aren't able to get things fixed, or, whatever, that's where the real people live. That's where the real people were, at Food Town in Fells Point in the 1990s.
Yeah. Is Food Town still exist?
No, it doesn't seem to be. I looked it up.
Yeah.
Also, when he said he went around the corner and there was a bait shop, well, I think it might have been, because this place has been there since 1916. It might have been Tochterman's, which is on Eastern Avenue, which is like 2 blocks up from Thames Street. And they still sell bait, and they still sell bloodworms. So I think it might have been Tochterman's, because that's an old school fisher people, fishing supply store, and outdoor store. But it's been there forever. Big, beautiful store. Yeah, I love that he fell in love with, not only with Baltimore, but then he got to know Vince Peranio and Dolores and Pat Moran. And they're, like you said, we're his people. And that felt very comfortable. And maybe that's part of the reason why he did come back for 5 episodes. And kudos, he gave a shout out to the Teamsters, and he gave a shout out to Shelley Ziegler. Shelley, we have to have you on at some point. Who was on the first season, and then the second season, because I worked with her on Homicide, but then I think she was gone after the second season. I think she just is you watch any credits from any blockbuster movie these days, and you will see Shelley on them. I watched 2 big movies in a row one night, and Shelley was the first assistant director on both of them. And he also gave a shout. He said how much fun it was driving around with Vince Peranio and Deb Donaldson, who was locations at the time.
Yeah. The only other thing I found amusing about Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, is when they were casting for Henry, and finally Michael Rooker turned up, and John was saying, how he was perfect in look, and he sort of said a little prayer to say, "Oh God, please let him be able to act." I found that quite funny. And Michael Rooker's an amazing actor, so he's had a fantastic career since Henry. So,
and I had just seen him in in Tombstone the other night, which is one of my favorites. The other weird thing is that the actress that was in the episode Many Splendored Thing, Adrienne Shelley, who was murdered, I think it was in 2006.
Was it that late? Wow, yeah, because she made a
like
film,
that.
didn't she?
Yeah, she directed a film called Waitress later. And yeah, apparently just a contractor working in her building was burglarizing her apartment when she came home, and he killed her. So that was sort of heartbreaking to hear, because she's a very sort of memorable person when you see that episode. She's a real standout in that episode. And I also like the comments John made about why the show is still good, and of course we always nod to the writing and the acting. And he went back and said, with the source material, you go back to David's book, and how good that source material was, and the fact that they drained every last, drop out of it that they could, for all the episodes until they ran out of it. And then they were, at that point they knew the kinds of stories, they wanted to write based on the book. And then I didn't know, I don't think at the time I knew that some of the directors were going on, and I think somebody, maybe one of the actors might have mentioned that too, going on ride-alongs with the cops. And I don't know if that's something that Gary Daddario, who became our tech advisor, who was a homicide detective, if it was, his able to get people in the cars with the cops. I thought that was interesting, and that John went and did that.
Yeah, and actually even the homicide detectives as well. That's because usually ride-alongs usually with a uniform, isn't it?
Yeah, and he said they were the homicide detectives, so it made me wonder, who it was, because obviously the first one he talks about, the guy's not dead. So, but yeah, and then he's got some stuff coming up, which is good to hear. I mean, John's been around a while. It's nice to hear that he's still got things going on and things in development. And I would read when he talked about that quote, the Jack Kerouac quote, which sort of was what he really agreed with about in his life. The only people for me are the mad ones.
Yes.
I would read that whole quote, but it's a long quote. So look it up, everybody. Jack Kerouac. It was from his book, his famous book, On the Road. The only people for me are the mad ones. And I did love his plugging our wonderful crab cakes here.
Yep.
How we liked the food here, and how Vince and Deb, and when they were out on location scouts, knew all the great places to go. And he remembered Bertha's Mussels, which unfortunately is now gone. That was a real institution in Fells Point forever. So everybody go back and take a look at those episodes, because they're some of the best episodes, I think.
Definitely. And just back on Adrienne Shelley for a second, check out her film Waitress. It's available on Amazon. She directs that. It came out in 2007, and it has Nathan Fillion and Kerry Russell in it. They're both fantastic actors.
Oh, I love both of them.
Yeah.
What year was it?
2007 it came out.
Wow.
So very sad that she died. So
I didn't know Kerry Russell was around in 2007.
Yeah. Kerry Russell's been around. So just before she did The Americans, I think. So yeah. So check that out. But and keep an eye out on Henry Portrait of the Serial Killer, because there's a new release coming up in the near future for the 40th anniversary. And thank you so much to John for being on the show. What a fantastic chat
John.
that was. I really enjoyed that. It was great to meet him. So yeah. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening. It's the end of season 2. Thank you so much. And we'll be back in May for season 3 with new interviews coming up. And as we said, we've got John Seda as our opener. So yeah,
come back. More fun, interesting stuff.
Definitely. Right. Well, bye for now, and catch you soon. Take care.